Welcome to number 17 of Pickwick Monthly. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And my Pickwickian co-host for today is a new one, Max Magee. Hi, Max.
Hello. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin, by the way.
There we go. And we'll let everybody know why Max is joining us today. Well, we needed somebody to fill in today, and Max was the perfect choice, as you will find out as we do this show. And what Max and I will be doing is what we've been doing for 17 months, including this one. Now it'll go for 20. We're talking about Charles Dickens's The Posthumous Papers of the Pickwick Club, as it was first serialized in monthly parts from March 1836 to October 1837. Once a month, myself and one of a rotating set of co-hosts talk about each serialized part. And Max, there's only 3 more episodes to go, including today. I mean, I can't believe it. So
They're getting good. They're back to excellent, par excellence.
now I say this is number 17 and there's 3 to go, including today. It's because the last part in October, everyone, is 2 parts in one. When they published this, it was numbers 19 and 20 came out in a double issue. I think it's the same price. I have to check too. I think it was still just a shilling, but it was the same price for the double issue. I might be wrong, might be 2. But anyway, the double issue comes out to finish it. And also along the way, we have shared items from the Rosenbach's collections, the complete serial issues of Pickwick Papers, portions of the manuscript. We have Dickens letters, ephemera. We have a lock of Dickens hair at the Rosenbach. I'm going to share that. I think that's on the last episode. And today, I have some punch recipes to share that are in Dickens's own hand, his own recipes. Here's one of them I'm drinking now. Oh my God, it's good. And also in today's episode, number 17 is chapters 47 to 49, or in the original serial, it was 46 to 48 because their numbers are off. And in this serial part, Pickwick shines his light on everyone. And we have the final interpolated tale of the serial. So the story of the Bagman's uncle, which is a good story too, isn't it, Max? I really like it.
Yeah, it's certainly up there with some of the reminiscent of other like Christmas Carol hallucination tales and some of the other great ones that you'll recall from graveyards past.
Well, one passed in this serial.
Uh-huh.
If you're watching live right now, I invite you to please like and subscribe and have fun in the live chat. Hello, everyone. I see you're already saying hello. Thank you so much. If you're watching the recording, I also please ask you to like and subscribe to these videos. I would love for you to leave comments or questions, and if you do, I will answer them. There we go. I had forgot to put my welcome out there, and now I just have. My co-host is for today's episode has been watching since the beginning of Pickwick Monthly, and that's how we met. Max is generally known as many things, but he is also known as a renowned Sherlockian, who was a co-host on one of our subscription-only Hound of the Baskervilles episodes. Max holds a BS in engineering, mechanics, and astronautics from the University of Wisconsin. He's worked as a flight design engineer, flight controller at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. He's currently manager of software development in Madison, Wisconsin, and reading Pickwick along with us. Max.
For the first time, as a matter of fact.
Tell us about that. What's this experience been like for you? And like, did you come into it already? How much Dickens had you experienced before this?
I think like all of us, we often have Dickens thrust upon us in high school when I don't think my brain was ready for it. We read Great Expectations when I was a freshman in high school, and I sort of just crammed through it. But over the years, I've looked back fondly on some of the characters of Pip and Mrs. Wollersheim or
Havisham.
And Wollersheim is a winery nearby, actually. So no, but you know, I find myself quoting from the books that I've read of Dickens more often than reading Dickens. And so in the last couple of years, through the Sherlockian readings I've done, there was a crossover tale called The Case of the D Case, I believe it was called, where an author posited what Sherlock Holmes and Auguste Dupin and other notable detectives would have concluded about who the murderer was in Edwin Drood, the unfinished case by Charles Dickens, who
Yeah.
died before he actually completed it. And so that made me go, well, I want to read Edwin Drood. Well, there's a lot of versions of Edwin Drood that have been completed by different authors. And so I probably read 3 or 4 different versions of it, and I have my favorites. But I said, I should probably go back to the beginning. And it was right around that time that I heard about Pickwick Monthly. And I said, I would like to become a Pickwick Club member. But the closest thing to it is you guys and the Rosenbach. So, I got my start just listening and reading along with the monthly. And I have read other Dickens in between then and now. But, just kind of touching on different aspects of it. I'd say my depth is very shallow in Dickens. And so I'm coming into this as a sort of neophyte reader.
But you also do so much, with Sherlock in 19th century, at least late 19th century. So you
Yeah.
used to at least, I mean, it's not quite the same
No,
time period.
it feels
But
very similar. A little bit more rustic is the
yeah,
feeling that I get from these. The townships that they pass through are very, farm agricultural and very, I say rustic, but it's rough. You're sleeping in an inn in the common room, in the traveler's room. The coaches themselves are pretty rough. The foodstuffs are very interesting, and also, just thinking about the lifestyle and again, you're getting a picture of, I guess, early Victorian life here,
yeah.
right?
But it's even earlier because,
Yeah,
this is
before.
the dawn of the Victorian age. She becomes queen during the serial, and Dickens is really writing about 10 years, 20 years before this as well.
Okay.
So
Yeah, and even in the dream sequence here, you can tell that he's harkening back to an earlier era of like maybe the 18th century
yeah.
with the buckled boots and the breeches, silk breeches rolled up. But yeah, so all of these are, fun forays into the past for me, and I've been enjoying it a lot. I love the scene setting as much as I love the narrative.
Well, you dressed for the part today with
Thank
your
you. My wife made this for me. It's a work in
Regency shirt,
progress. That's right.
ready to jump into the pond.
Hmm. Just got to cool off.
You also led by email. You led a Hound of the Baskervilles serial reading.
Yes.
In that's original 9. What was it originally? 9 parts? Yeah, 9 parts.
Yeah, it's 9 months, 9 parts. Well, each of them was either 2 or 3 chapters, and
Yeah,
so you would read essentially what was published that month in the Strand magazine in 1901,
yeah,
and it spread into 1902. And what's interesting is in 2019, when I was leading that project, we started with about 30 people, and by the end, we almost had 100. And so people were jumping in. It's kind of like a hit series that people find later. They go back and they binge up to where you are now. Um, and again, like the project with the Hound of the Baskervilles that you led recently was very reminiscent of that. You can forget, or at least you can tell yourself that you forget the end of the novel when you start at the beginning and you really delve into those scenes and those aha moments of the footprints of a gigantic hound. And it's very similar with Pickwick. I think going back and reading Charles Dickens serially is much more enjoyable for me than it was to try to cram it all into one, like where you just
yeah,
keep trying to read through and read through. I need a break. I think for me it's like watching TV on Netflix, like
yeah.
4th episode in, it's too much for me.
But 20 months is a long time for
It
this.
is.
So
It is.
we are really, like and you stuck to it, haven't you? You didn't read ahead,
Yes.
did you? Yeah.
No, no, I've intentionally not read ahead, but what it means is that you're reading other things. And so you get to experience through the lens of whatever you're reading. For example, I'm reading Lonesome Dove, like in parallel to this, and I see a lot of parallels in the stories that like the plot isn't what drives a lot of these tales. It's the scene setting, it's the
Hmm.
characters, it's the
Yeah.
humor of the scene, and it's you fall in love with the characters and you want them to do well. And when they are put in danger, you care about them.
Chesterton says something almost exactly like that about how it's not, you don't read Dickens for plot, you read him for characters and scenes.
Yes.
So yeah.
Number one, I think that Dickens has painted some of the best street scenes, almost like photographic realism in the way that he talks about the smells, the sights, the sounds, the textures. And, he also makes it really enjoyable. It's not just a list of, and then there was this, and then there was this. It's like, and then Ripston Pippin-faced man did this, and you're like, what's that? Oh, it's an apple. Oh, apple. Okay, that's a good way to just say, somebody's drunk. Uh, you know. But yeah, like, and the steam rolling off of the chestnut carts, or the fire smoke that's, coming out of somebody's who's roasting sweet potatoes, or, like, just again, like, immersing yourself, sight, sound, taste, even, speaking of which, do we want to talk punches?
Speaking of drinking, um,
I was going to show mine.
whoa, and your Bullwinkle mug. That's awesome.
This is my throwback to another Christmas tradition at my house, which is watching National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. And so we have the actual moose glasses.
There you go.
Mm.
So it's not technically Bullwinkle.
No, it's cartoon moose.
Any moose is Bullwinkle to me anyway. If I met a real moose, I'd call him Bullwinkle. It's just
okay.
Given. So
they might not like that, but anyway, that tastes like
they don't like much of anything about people. Don't mess with a moose.
That's why they're so angry. People call him Bullwinkle. But yeah, so I've made the Innocence punch that you suggested, and this was interesting.
Right.
Go ahead and do the recipe.
Good. I'm going to share them first. And what we
yeah.
have at the Rosenbach is I'm going to share these are in Dickens' own hand. These are recipes that he had written and given to a friend. And here's the cover of it, of the sheet. It just folds out. It's one piece of paper that folds out, and written on the front, not in Dickens' hand, but is receipt, which was receipt ending in PT was the 19th century word for recipe. They called them receipts. Receipt for making cup o' punch given to me by Mr. Dickens. Bows. I love that they put bows in there. At Lausanne, this Switzerland. This is where Dickens met them and gave it to them and spent time with them. November 1864. I'm sorry, 1846. And the couple that he gave it to, here's the first page of it. The couple that he gave it to were the Watsons, Richard and Lavinia Watson, the Honorable Richard Watson.
As far as we know, they were not related to Dr. John Watson.
As far as we know, but I'm sure there's a Sherlockian paper in there that shows how they were. They were very wealthy, well-connected family in England. They owned Rockingham Castle. The family still owns it, the Watson family, and it is open. They do tours, they do events there. I think they have like a Ren Fair there or something like that. And you can go and visit. And Dickens visited and stayed there with them a time in England, but he actually originally met them in Switzerland. He loved to go to Switzerland. He stayed in the chalet, loved it so much. He eventually had it disassembled and brought to England, and it became his writing chalet at on his estate, and at Gad's Hill. And but this is where he met them and became friends with them and gave them this recipe. He continued to remain close to them. Richard Watson died just a few years later, suddenly, unexpectedly, and but Dickens remained close to his wife Lavinia and their family throughout, and actually had after this, it's 1849, 1850, when he wrote David Copperfield, he dedicates the novel David Copperfield to Richard and Lavinia Watson. So that's the dedication in the front of the book. That's how close he was to them, that he dedicated the novel that for him was the most personal to himself. These are the people he dedicated it to. Now, he gave them these punch recipes, and there's two of them. The Innocence punch is set, and that's just part of this here. And then the rest of it is at the bottom here to make 3 pints of Innocence or punch. And then that finishes up here and here. That's a very long recipe. And he's dated it Lausanne, 13th November, 1846.
And can I also point out one piece in there that's very important is that there's a, right in the center, just above the first fold, it says, strain it off through milk. So
Yeah.
that would be like a milk punch, right? To clarify it.
Strain it off through milk, the lemon. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are a lot of people who don't understand this because I've seen it all over the internet now too. And they say strain it through silk, which I think would be a terrible idea. But they didn't understand what that meant. But a milk punch was a way of clarifying a lot, like,
Yeah.
still keep the alcohol and the flavor, but it makes it clear, basically.
I don't strain it off through milk when I do this.
No.
So, and I make this punch every year. This Innocence is a well-known Dickens punch. You'll find the recipe for this all over the internet. Not because of this document that we have. He actually wrote his punch recipe, not calling it Innocence, and sent it to another friend. And you can find that's in the letters of Dickens, the Big Pilgrim edition. And that's where the recipe is usually taken from. It's essentially the same recipe. It's just worded a little bit differently because he wrote it out from scratch for each recipient. That's the punch that Dickens is known for. I make it every year. We have a Drinking with Dickens event at the Rosenbach every December, in-person event, and I make the punch and we all drink it. And then there's a Dickens reading or performance kind of thing. And I love that punch. That's really great to have. And I always have a cold. We never do it. I don't do it hot just because it's too difficult and in the historic house, the Rosenbach, to do it anything hot there. So it requires other equipment, and so I don't bother to do that. We just have a cold. It's delicious cold. But I've never made Moonbeams.
Okay, yeah, go do your Moonbeams. I want to talk a little bit about the difficulty of making the punch and why you wouldn't want to do it in a library.
Moonbeams, here it is. I love this. To make Moonbeams for summer drinking. That's why I've been waiting to have this for this episode, for summer drinking when we're doing this episode. To pour into a jug in this proportion, 2 wine glasses of Madeira. And all his measurements are always a wine glass. So whatever wine glass you have, no, actually in the other one, it's like large wine glass. And then there's like a small wine glass in one of the recipes. Like, I don't know how big that is. But 2 wine glasses of Madeira, 2 kinds of 2/3 of a wine glass of brandy. I used cognac, and 4 wine glasses of water. Add the peel of a small lemon, cut very thin. And again, you really want to cut thin. You don't want the rind. You don't want that white rind on there. That makes it too bitter. You just want that lemon rind without the white part.
Gives it the oils, the aromatics.
And then sweeten to taste. Plunge into the hole a brown toast. I'll get back to this in a sec. Grate a little nutmeg all over the surface. Tie a cloth on the jug. Mine was in a big plastic jug. So it had a lid. And let it stand in a cool place or in cold water until you are ready to drink its contents. Now, when I first made it last night, I tasted it and I was like, I shouldn't have added all that water. It should have just been like, and I actually put a whole cup of the brandy in. I'm not going to like 2/3. I just did a glass. And and I used the wine glass that we have. And I thought maybe it was too much water, but no. Then when I let it sit overnight and I tasted it today, it's absolutely perfect. That the lemon and the nutmeg that I put in it that made and the wine kind of or the alcohol overnight really makes it fine. It was totally the right amount. I did not plunge into the whole a brown toast.
Oh, Ed.
And that is exactly what you think it means. It is a big piece of toast to put it in there. And that was common. That's where we get the term to make a toast with your drink from, is because there was toast in the punch or drink, whatever it was. People would then take the sop pieces afterwards and eat them. I don't know if it does anything to the drink in like maybe it absorbs alcohol or something. I don't know if there's any like chemical reaction that happens because of the bread? Go ahead,
May
Mike.
I give you some perspective on this? So my
Yeah.
wife and I have gone through each Christmas we try to make a different traditional punch recipe or cider recipe or alcoholic recipe. We made wassail a
Yeah.
couple of years
I
ago,
do that every year. Yeah.
and it involves slices of bread, and or at least some recipes do, and
Yeah.
it thickens it. It makes it into more of a like pudding almost than it does like a. I mean, it's on the surface, of course, but like you get a different texture. You also get a little bit of a thick mouth feel to it, so it changes it quite a bit. And
Yeah.
if you didn't put the toast in it, you didn't get no moonbeams, sir.
Hey, like any cocktail recipe, my advice is always or
Make it
whatever you feel like doing.
absolutely.
So you need to make it to just as he says, sweeten to taste.
Mhm.
Everything should be to taste in when you're making a drink. But this Moonbeams is very good, and I'm absolutely going to make this more. It's so simple to make.
Yeah.
Um, Unlike the Innocence, which is a little more complicated because you did this. I will share these recipes on our Facebook page. I'll also put the transcriptions of the recipes in the comments section on this video, so it's there for everybody to have.
I recommend trying the Innocence. If you haven't tried making the Innocence the way that he suggests once in your life, you are not, I'm not going to say you're not a true Dickensian, but you are not getting the full Dickens experience.
Because it requires fire.
Yes. So what Dickens suggests is that you mix these ingredients that starts with a very good rum. The better the rum, the better the punch. It says it right there, I believe. Yeah, about 4 lines from the bottom. In parentheses, 6 lines from the bottom. The
Better
better
the
the
spirit, the
spirit.
better the punch.
Yes. And then
I use two kinds
another.
of rum. I usually use dark and light, and
Okay, I made it
I
with all dark, and I actually floated a little more dark on top because it wasn't strong enough for me.
yeah, I use dark and light. I think it gives it a better flavor.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's a little bit more like a Mai Tai, right? Where you use two types of rum. Um, but in this case, it's a double handful
Double
of lump
handful of lump
sugar.
sugar.
So I guess to taste is really, as you say, like this means like put as much in as you want.
Yeah. What
And
sugar did you use? Regular white sugar?
I just had granulated. I know they
I
say,
use Demerara sugar whenever
yeah,
I make this punch. I
that's
always
what they
use the
suggest.
yeah.
Maybe the molasses, or some like browner sugar would also maybe help. But I wanted to try to do it as base to the recipe as you could. But the next part is, and light fire to the whole.
Yeah, it says, the cleanest and easiest way of doing this is by filling a warm spoon with the spirit,
Mhm.
lighting the contents at a wax taper. Did you use the
I
wax?
did not use a wax taper. I
And
did.
then slowly dropping them into the basin as it drips the fire.
I found that I had to do this several times because the spirits came from my liquor cabinet, which was not warm. And
Yeah.
so if it's not warm, it's actually harder to light them on fire. And so the flambe, you put it over a heat source first, and then you would ignite it. But it's very similar to that process. It doesn't have enough energy to keep itself alight for 3 or 4 minutes, unless you've heated it.
And I'd
So
never leave it light that long. It's just I
yeah,
don't want to burn that much alcohol out of
yeah.
it, actually.
Well, and that's what it did is it took most of the alcohol out. And so that's why I added some more back in. Because what you end up with is a fermented flavor, a strong herbal, and a little bit of caramelized because you had the lemon peel in there and they've burnt a bit. And
Yeah.
so you got a very nice roasted lemon citrus,
Yep.
almost an Arnold Palmer flavor where you've got the lemon and
Hmm.
you've got sort of the tea fermentation, but it concentrates the flavor of whatever rum you're using and whatever brandy you're using. And so you end up with the flavors of them without as much of a kick. So if you
Mhm.
want the punch to be stronger, one, don't add as much water and don't let it burn as long. In fact,
Yeah.
I suggest don't burn it. Just drink it.
And the water's afterwards. Like you do all
Yep.
this with the rum and the brandy,
Yep.
and then you light that on, and the lemon peels in there, and then you
Yep.
light that on fire, and then you add water to
You add the lemon juice and the water at the end
yeah.
because it will not burn if it's too dilute.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was a lot of fun, and the flame is beautiful. It is such a show. And from what I've seen and read, Dickens would do this in front of a group as sort of a showstopper. Like, imagine like blue flames licking up a foot high because it really does go when you've got it lit.
Uh-huh.
And then, he would give it to his audience, I would imagine, or his guests that he's having over, because remember, this is for 3 pints. And I think on your note, it even said 50 people.
Yeah.
Seems a little bit high. I think maybe about 20 people would satisfy.
And he recommends you could do it hot then right away. And I've done that at home.
Mhm.
Or that you can ice it and it's good to cool. And I think it's better that way anyway. I think it's better when you leave it sit overnight,
Mm.
same as this Moonbeams. And then you can always heat it up again.
Yeah,
But I find that it's actually better that there's more flavor in it when you've let it sit overnight. So.
interesting. Yeah, and
I almost never nutmeg Innocence, but
it doesn't call for it. It doesn't call for it. And one thing is, it tells you how to rewarm it too. Is
yeah.
About an hour before you're about to serve it, take it out and set it by your fire. So there you go. Of course, you're going to have a fire.
Well, I will share these recipes with everyone. And what's fabulous is that the Innocence recipe has been known always. The Moonbeams recipe has not been known, although it's not a complicated drink. And I was researching all these different kinds of punches, and this kind of recipe has been around for hundreds of years and just slightly different, maybe more lemon in it, and but it's basically a recipe that's been around for a long time. This is just his specific proportions that Dickens would do. It was this is TP's Weekly from 1906, and shortly after, a few years later, this Moonbeams recipe was in an issue of the Dickensian. And as far as I know, that Dickensian issue is the last time this recipe was ever published, and it's not online anywhere except in these places where you find it in other things. So I'm going to make sure we get it out there.
That's great.
For people to use and to make for summer drinking.
For summer drinking.
It is excellent. Good.
I love that we can still experience again, like, we walk through these literary scenery, but drinking something that they were drinking at the time, smoking something that they were smoking at the time, it really puts you into that mood. Like, I feel like it's almost immersion to the greatest degree possible. Not only that, but a little bit of a mind-altering substance when you read. It'll put you into an old junkyard for mail carriages, but I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Well, my motto: read, drink, repeat. And somebody very recently, Jessica is her name, has sent me a bookmark she made: read, drink, repeat, with there's my name under it, Edward G. Pettit.
That's great.
And all these, books, and then all the booze, glasses, and bottles behind it. So,
I feel like that should be on your business card.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Before I forget,
need some merch for that. So
I will tell you one of the things that I love about these reading projects too is that I get to experience the inside jokes that people have had out there for 30, 40, 50 years in my locality, and I never got it. We have a student printing shop, so where you would go to get your pamphlets and your printing for your required reading for classes, called Bob's Copy Shop. But it is actually known as the Pickwick Papers, Pigwick, doing business as Bob's Copy Shop. And so I never understood that was a reference to the perspiring fog, the poem Mr. Pickwick,
expiring frog.
Expiring. Sorry. Yeah.
You say perspiring?
Perspiring fog is what I said.
Okay.
So, but yeah, and that's the type of thing that I just would never have picked up on. I was just like, that's weird.
Now you know.
Yeah, and I love that. And now I have a connection to that, copy shop. So,
well, number 17, let's get to it. It comes out. It's the advertiser in this, which isn't in the copy that I shared, the Pickwick Advertiser for number 17. It says the impression of the advertising sheet is limited to 20,000, but the circulation of the work being 26,000, that number of bills is required. And I think by bills, they mean the sheets that they will give them to then be printed. And I'm not 100% sure what this means. That number of bills is required, meaning you have to provide us with 26,000. Even though the impression is limited to 20, I'm not 100% sure what this means. And I'm throwing it out there because I haven't been able to figure this out. And I'm wondering if maybe somebody in our audience has some kind of clue what that means, not from today but today from any time. But 26,000 a month is what they're printing. When this began, Chapman and Hall knew that they needed to print, or they knew they needed to sell 2,000 copies a month in order to make a profit with what they were paying Dickens and the illustrator Seymour at the time. And they needed to do 2,000 a month. Then as it went on, by issue 3, they were starting to do the advertiser in it. So then they're making more money on top of that. But the 2,000 copies they printed for number 1 the sales were so poor that they reduced the print run to reduced the print run by 500 for number 2.
Oh.
And now 26,000. So like this thing is just like, it's just been taking off, and the most issues will be sold for the final.
Are book 2 and book 3 of the original printings, are those the hardest to find then? Because they had so few printings?
In original, yeah, in its first state, yes. So we don't have a first state at the Rosenbach. The ones that I share from the University of Victoria Library, that's not a first state. And as a matter of fact, most of the early issues of the ones that I've been sharing from the University of Victoria are definitely not first states because they don't have Pickwick advertisers. What happened was after that run of 20,000 or 26,000 that included the Pickwick advertiser, they would print more, but they weren't including the advertiser in those. Or maybe that difference between 20,000 and 26, maybe that 6,000 difference, maybe they don't have the advertiser. I'm not quite sure, what this means, this wording. But so most copies that you find are actually not first state. The first states, the first printings are a lot rarer than the later because they kept up until the very end. They're like, oh, we need some more of number 3, like they will be printing them up and making sure they got out there to the stalls to sell.
So if they're not charging you something like 50,000 or 60,000 for a complete set, is probably not a first impression.
But any complete Pickwick is worth having in serial issues. Now, this one I always have at home. This is like a facsimile from Easton Press. But even those can sell for good money, facsimiles, not the thousands.
But
they it's by this point you can assemble a perfect, and there's a couple editions, there's a couple bibliographies that tell you what all the points for a perfect Pickwick in parts is, and
that's
really
great. I love that game.
The Free Library of Philadelphia has a perfect first because the Free Library of Philadelphia has the Pickwick parts that were given to Mary Hogarth, Dickens' sister-in-law, who died. And then after she died, he continued to give them, and then it was to her father, George Hogarth. And that is a complete 19 issues and 20 parts of first print runs to the Hogarths and to Mary. So that's a perfect set right there.
Speaking of Dickensian connections locally, I recently went to the Graceland Cemetery in Chicago, Illinois, to visit Vincent Sterrett's grave primarily, but also Augustus Dickens is buried there. So it's Charles Dickens, I believe, youngest brother, who
Did you visit the grave?
Yes. It's hard to locate. Not a lot of people care to visit because he was a bigamist and left his family and kind of, like I said, a cad. But you know, it is prominently displayed. It is, you know, one of the closest connections to Charles Dickens in the Midwest. He did
Interesting. Yeah.
tour on the East Coast extensively, but I don't think he ever made it to Chicago, did he?
No, I don't think Charles Dickens went to Chicago. I'm pretty
No.
sure he didn't.
Well, if he did, it was to visit his brother, and I don't think he did any like press tours or anything. There's no clippings of his hair, as far as I know, in any of the collections there.
I wonder, did he get that far west on his second tour in the
It may have been.
1960s? I don't think he did, but
Okay.
I'll have to
I know
check.
that he did visit his brother. I just don't know where that visit
Yeah.
took place.
This issue also contains, as you have in your serial edition, before the story starts, I'll share this with you. Here's the issue 17, and there's the plates. But then here, new work by Bose. Messrs. Chapman and Hall have the pleasure of announcing that they have completed arrangements with Miss Charles Dickens for the production of an entirely new work, to, in all caps, bold, to be published monthly at the same price and in the same form as the Pickwick Papers. The first number will appear on the 31st of March, 1838, and that will be Nicholas Nickleby. That's the next one that he's going to do. Now, remember, he's not even halfway done Oliver Twist in Bentley's Miscellany right now, which is in monthly parts and will run for, I think, 2 straight years, 24 months. And
He's 9 months in or 6 months into Oliver Twist. Is that right? At this point?
yeah, it started in January. So, by August, it's 8 months. He's 8 parts in, and he's going for I think a full 24 months.
Gotcha.
And he missed 1 month. 1 month he didn't do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, didn't you? I think you shared a letter about.
Actually, 2 months he didn't do it. 1 month from Mary Hogarth, and actually, the next month coming up, he pulled it because he's feuding with Bentley.
Right.
He's trying to get out of his contract with Bentley is what he's trying to do. He doesn't want to edit Bentley's Miscellany anymore, and he doesn't want other people to make more money than him off of his works. I think that's kind of always his thing. When people make more money than him off of his work, he gets aggravated. Now, of course, that's the publishing industry. That's the way it works. But Chapman and Hall are always willing to work with him, buy his copyrights. They bought the copyright for Sketches by Bose, which you also see advertised here. And what he had done is Dickens had complained that Macrone was now going to release Sketches by Bose as a monthly serial in the same format as Pickwick. And he was so angry that he was going to do that. And he could just do it because he owned the copyright at the time. So Dickens had Chapman and Hall buy it back. And Chapman and Hall are now going to release it in 20 monthly numbers, 1 shilling each, just like Pickwick Papers. So they'll all overlap. Sketches, the end of Oliver Twist and the beginning of Nicholas Nickleby will actually all overlap, and there'll be a part a month you could read for Dickens at this one time. That he's throwing it all out there onto the market. He finds as many ways as he can to get his works into people's hands. The original sketches were in newspapers and other periodicals, and then it was in a book, and now it'll be in a 20-month parts. Oliver Twist, originally in Bentley's Miscellany. Years later, he will release Oliver Twist in these kind of monthly parts to make it uniform with the rest of his books, but like 8 years later, after, so he's always looking for multiple ways to, find readers for his works.
That's amazing. I sometimes have a hard time keeping up with the monthly readings. Imagine having a hard time keeping up with writing 3 at a time.
That's crazy. Well, he's never writing 3 at a time.
Two.
Sketches is already done.
Yeah, he's writing 2 at a time, but still publishing and editing and
through Nicholas Nickleby, he's writing 2 works at the same time for half the year. So, and then it changes, and then he goes into a weekly format for Old Curiosity Shop and Barnaby Rudge because he thinks, oh, I need to take it easy, and then he did even harder. So, writing those weekly. All righty.
Can I ask you a question about adaptations quickly?
Sure.
Have you found a good Pickwick adaptation either in visual or audio or like dramatic interpretation?
There's a BBC dramatization from 1985 that's pretty good.
I've listened to that one and I've
No,
found it.
I mean
Yeah.
the video film.
Oh, okay. I've heard the audio.
And it's in 10 parts, and it's pretty good. It's
Right.
it's not spectacular, but it's enjoyable to watch when you know the characters, and it's very enjoyable. There's an old movie of it too from the 1950s.
Hmm.
Uh, that's it's a couple of scenes are really funny in it. And there are a couple BBC radio adaptations you can find. You go on YouTube, you'll find these things pretty easily. Um, but I feel like it's never like there's no great Pickwick,
Yeah,
adaptation.
this may be one of those cases where adapting the source material just doesn't work in any other format unless you did like a long form like mini series, but which may yet come because that's what all of our television
Yeah,
is turned into these days, right?
yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I've noticed the same thing is that, I've taken a survey of a few and I just enjoy the way the writing happens too. It's not just the story, it's the humorous nature of the narrative. And I was pointing this out, I think, to you earlier, is that, or just offline, is that I really enjoy the narrator injecting himself into the story. And that, the way that the story is told is we know these characters, but they don't even know certain things, that the other characters have done or whatever. But the narrator gives you that little insight and says, no, but what he didn't know was this, and he didn't mean it like that, but oh, well, no one knew. And so he's along for the ride, but we're in his sidecar, like he's just giving us the asides.
You know who's always wanted to make this as a film? And I know this because he told me. It was
Oh,
Whit Stillman.
it's
Metropolitan years ago. He made the Love and Friendship movie from the Jane Austen novel Lady Susan.
interesting.
He was at the Rose. I interviewed him at the Rosenbach when the Love and Friendship movie came out, and but beforehand we were going to show him things, and I mentioned, oh, we have manuscript for Pickwick, and he was, what? Oh, I need to see that, and and then he said why he wanted to see it is because I've always wanted to make this into a movie. Like I've fooled around with, different kinds of like, how would you
Treatments.
do this as a
Yeah.
script and how would you make this work? And he's always wanted to do it. It would be quite something to have him do that one day, but we'll see.
I imagine the debtor's prison chapters would go a lot faster in a movie.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some good like comedy to be had from that, and it's squeezed out very well, but it takes a long time in the not manuscript, but in the series to play out. Is it three? Does it cover four, like from when he's in and out, four different serial issues, or is it just three?
Of say that again.
Of the serial here, how long does Pickwick stay in the debtor's prison? Because he goes in, then he's there, and there's a couple of vignettes about like at least three or four chapters about.
I think it's three serial issues. It's been
Yeah,
two and now this one. So yeah.
yeah, and it just takes a lot of the manuscript
Yeah.
or a lot of the story up. And there, I mean, there's some really great stuff about getting locked out of the prison. Like, sorry, you can't go back to jail tonight. We've closed.
We'll get to this now. And this is actually this issue, he kind of wraps it up.
Hmm.
Dickens Pickwick getting released from prison is kind of wrapping it up, but he still has to write, 2 more months, 3 more parts, coming up. In the last issue, in number 16, Mrs. Bardell was arrested for failure to pay Dodson and Fogg. Shows up at the prison. Pickwick sees her, walks away from her. He's still angry. And Sam right away tells Job Trotter to run off because Job Trotter's not in the prison. He's just there, as a servant to Jingle. He runs off to Perker, Pickwick's lawyer, on an errand. And we find out what that errand is as soon as he gets there in chapter 47. which is chiefly devoted to matters of business and the temporal advantage of Dodson and Fogg. Mr. Winkle reappears under extraordinary circumstances, and Mr. Pickwick's benevolence proves stronger than his obstinacy. Job gets there to Perker's to see him, and it's just as I said last month, I wasn't as in love with that serial part as I have been. For me, even when Dickens isn't furthering a plot, which isn't the point of Pickwick Papers, I just enjoy all the scenes that he's creating.
And the banter and the
I thought
Wellerisms.
I thought 16 was weak. I thought, the whole scenes with Mrs. Bardell and her friends was a little weak. I think even the scenes, it was just weak.
I kind of liked the Bardell scenes. I was a little confused by them though. I think because the Spaniard, I thought they were going to a Spaniard's house. I didn't realize the Spaniard was a well-known establishment. But I was right there with you though. I wasn't enjoying it as much, and I felt ashamed as a reader. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
no,
maybe
everyone can't be a home run. So
yeah. And when you
just
said that, I'm telling you, Ed, like that's part of the joy of this project is when you said that, it gave me permission to go, yeah, I didn't like it because it wasn't good. Not I didn't like it because I'm a Philistine and I only drink sugary soda, you know?
sometimes he just hits a single, and it's fine. A single's
Yeah,
good. Sometimes it's just a walk. That's
right.
totally fine. You made it on base.
Yeah,
Dickens rarely strikes out.
yeah.
He
And if
rarely
he
strikes
does,
out.
next month, you got
Yeah,
another one coming next month.
yeah.
And I really enjoyed this one too. Like there were you don't you all who are watching this didn't get the email from me that I sent to Ed, but I love nerding out on just the tiniest little details in these things. So when we get to the
You
next
have done
chapter,
this from the very beginning. This is how we
yeah,
met. Like I
yeah,
was getting these long emails on like real specific little points, which I love.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
About
I
Bear
never thought
Grease
it was.
pomade and who
Yeah.
made the best pomade in New York.
So you go down rabbit holes. You find a word and you're
Love it.
like off researching, finding all Google books, 19th century time
Yep.
frame, I'm sure, doing all that stuff.
Absolutely. Oh, the
Yeah.
internet is like constantly at my fingertips, which I love. Like I live in an era where I can see the research that people have done in the early 19th century, going back to the early 18th century, just talking about or early 20th century, talking about the early 19th century. And it's all out there and we live in such a great age for
It
that.
used to be I mean, you had to go to the library, you had
Yeah,
to look at microfiche and microfilms and,
right. I
and
remember
all
I
these
lived
books
through
to
those
find this
days.
stuff. Oh, I did too. I did all that. Yeah.
Where you come out with an armload of books and half of them are referencing just the other one that you had that was the primary source, and you're like,
Mhm.
well, that's garbage and that's not helpful. And then you're like, oh, this is the one. But yeah, if the library didn't have it, you didn't see it.
Well, it's a lot easier now. And but where I started on this is that I didn't think Dickens was a strong last month, but this one, even in just this little scene with Job Trotter arriving at Perkers and the him getting into the place with the servant and then Perker serving his other, treating his other friends who were there for the party that he's having. Like just it all works well. And it's Dickens really getting these little scenes with characters just being enjoyable to hear and watch as they go through. Not like super hilarious, but
No.
enjoyable enough to be in their company.
And it's told in such a fun
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
Like that's where the narrator makes a big difference here. If it were just playing it straight, it would be a little droll. But in this case, there are a lot of double entendres or like sarcastic remarks from the narrator, just
Uh-huh.
the way that he tells it.
So Perker comes in and gives him the news, and he just gives the news that Dodson and Fogg have taken Mrs. Bardell in execution for her costs, sir, said Job. And Perker's like, really? And and
This
then he and then he
cathedral's full.
comments, he says, those are the cleverest scamps I ever had anything to do with, meaning Dodson and Fogg's. The sharpest practitioners I ever knew, observed Lowton, the other guy there with them. And they're constantly complimenting, and they've been doing this for the whole novel. Dodson and Fogg on how, how much
Terrible they are, but they're good
yes,
at what they do.
how well they can cheat people out of money
Yep.
legally. So it's not cheating if it's legal. And they but he recognizes, just as Sam did, what this means. That he says at 10, and he tells him he'll be there, this is part of the message, and he says at 10 precisely I will be there, said the little man Perker. Sam is quite right, tell him so. That he, like, Sam right away, as soon as Mrs. Bardell comes into the prison, he's like, this is how I'm going to get Mr. Pickwick out. This is, how
Yes,
we convince him,
his gentlemanly nature,
because he
right?
will have to do something good for someone, even though he's angry with them because
Yes.
they have wronged him, and the lawyers themselves especially. It will, enable him to be the benevolent Pickwick that he is.
Very quick tangent. I saw a lot of myself in Pickwick refusing to kowtow to the evil agents
Sure.
because, it's like, I'm not going to pay that traffic ticket because I didn't deserve it. Boy, will that get you into trouble. I'm not saying I've ever done that, but it's like, like nobody else got a ticket on that day. I wasn't there for too much longer than 2 hours, whatever. But like it's him, cutting off his nose to spite his face.
Yes.
He's the one that ends up in the prison, right? Like, he's willing to suffer all of these travails just because he thinks it's an injustice.
He's also a single gentleman of means. So, clearly
Yeah,
if
but
I had to go to prison for something that wasn't my fault, it's not about me anymore. It's about my wife and
oh,
family.
right, right. There was no leverage that would have required him to until now. Yeah.
Well, Job can't get back into the prison at night because now he's locked out, and he goes to Covent Garden Market to spend the night in a vegetable basket.
It wasn't just because he was locked out. It's because he went on all these other errands, knowing that he was going to get locked out. Oh no, I can't spend the night in prison. Like that's the whole conceit of that scene, is that he's like, oh, it's almost 10. I better start heading back.
They attend the next day. The Perker's there, taps on Pickwick's door, and visits Pickwick. He bestowed a look of intelligence on Sam, intimating that he understood he was not to say he had been sent for. They don't want Pickwick to think that people are plotting to get him to do something. He has to just lay the case before him. And he brings in the papers and Bardell and Pickwick right away is, throws himself into the chair, folded his hands, and looked sternly, if Mr. Pickwick ever could look sternly. Which
Okay.
is a nice little detail because, go ahead.
Yeah. No. I was going to say, so when you think of Pickwick, I think of the illustrations, like just a circular face with eyeglasses on it. But if you had to cast someone from, let's say, any era, who would you call like your favorite Mr. Pickwick fan?
I don't know. I don't think I've ever really thought of that. Do you
The
have one?
only one I'm coming up with, and this is because of the comic nature of it, would be like Bob Hoskins, or like
Hoskins
maybe,
is too intense, though.
well, or maybe Richard Knight, who played not Kramer, Newman on
Yeah.
on Seinfeld, or, and this is the one I think I always come back to, is Danny DeVito, back in
Yeah.
his like 80s era, like comedian, or Taxi even. Taxi, he was kind of mean, but in the 80s, he could have pulled off a Pickwick, and he's got the physique for it.
That kind of round-faced benevolence. It's not surprising that there aren't many
Yeah,
well-known, actors that have that kind of look, because that's not a super attractive look,
right.
to make films. And
Anyone who can play Falstaff, I think, though, could probably play a good Pickwick.
yeah, Falstaff though looks like you have to look a little too much.
Yeah.
Like you
Oh,
you've
sure.
indulged too much, and there's an air of corruption about
Mm.
Falstaff too.
Okay.
That
I'll take that. I'll take that. But I think that if you clean up a Falstaff, you kind of could get a Pickwick out of it. So just no cross garters or anything like that,
because he's
Just
got to have the belly. Pickwick's got to have the belly and the round face, but
and
not
this the skin tight breeches.
Yeah, but his legs aren't, he's not heavy otherwise.
Mhm.
So unlike like Tony Weller size, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So all righty.
So
They
one other, like in this scene, they use the red tape, the word red tape, that originates from the binding of legal documents, right? Like I just wanted to touch on it because we don't need to go into depth, but it's another one of
small
those.
bundle of documents tied with red tape. There
Mhm.
it is. And that's how that originally arises. Government documents, legal documents
Yep.
tied up in a red ribbon or tape become symbolic of, the ridiculous amounts
Oh
of
yeah.
paper that you have to get
Kafkaesque
through in
bureaucracy.
bureaucracy. Yeah.
Exactly. I don't even know where I picked that one up, but I think it was probably another Charles Dickens. I think it may have been Great Expectations, as a matter of fact.
Well, Perker has to now convince him, and he does. He says, uh Mr. Pickwick says, well, rest with Dodson and Fogg to help her. Like they're the ones that put her in jail now because she signed the cognizant, which says that, she's responsible for the costs. But Perker says it does not rest with Dodson and Fogg. You know the men, my dear sir, as well as I do. It rests solely, wholly, entirely with you. Now, Pickwick is technically right. They could just let her out of it, but the reality is they're never going to let her out of it
They're
until
doing it to get his money.
yeah. And
Yeah.
uh so it's Pickwick is the only person in a position that can in reality do something to change the situation. And nobody, and Perker puts it more specific. He says, nobody but you can rescue her from this den of wretchedness.
Damsel in distress.
And this has been what has been, depressing Pickwick, since he's been in the prison, the kind of wretchedness he sees in everyone and how, horrible these conditions are. And now he's given a chance to get someone out of there
Mhm.
for 150 pounds, which is peanuts to
Well,
him.
for him, yeah, and
Yeah.
this is one of those situations where I am a member of the Fourth Garrideb, which is the numismatical society of the Sherlock Holmes groups.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of guys, Greg Ruby, who's a great
Greg
guy.
Ruby runs that, doesn't he?
Yep. One of the things that they have is an inflation calculator and a discussion about why inflation is so tough to calculate.
Yeah.
Not only is there an exchange rate you have to consider between British pounds and American dollars if you're an American, but there were at least two different tiers of society at the time. Like we think of class as like, oh, middle class, the rich
Yeah.
and the poor. No, it was the high class, it was the landed gentry, as the phrase goes, and it was who I would have been, which is the paupers, right? And so, your what was it called? Your distaff cousin, or the cousin on the distaff side, those would have been people who had either fallen low or never made it to your station. But for Pickwick, he was rich, like not
Yeah.
just rich, but he was wealthy. And so 150 pounds for him was peanuts, but
Yeah.
150 pounds was more than a person who was working would have made in a year. Much more.
18, 30, 25, whenever the story is
Oh yeah,
technically set. I mean, Mrs. Bardell lives for years on that.
right, right. And so that's one of those like big distinctions that when you do an inflation calculator, it doesn't work
Yeah.
the way you think it works. But yeah,
But you live
for
on probably 60 pounds a year at this point,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
trying to
I mean,
think.
5 pounds would have been quite a bit.
Yeah.
Like, you're talking like 5 pounds is a big deal if you're not some of the upper class, upper
Yeah.
crust. But if you read Sherlock Holmes stories, there's 5 pounds here, a shilling there, like it's just
It's a
it
little
goes,
later too, but
yeah, right, right. But it's also, remember, this is literature too. And so you got to make those numbers up, up, up in order to interest your readers because they're not going to go
Mhm.
out of their way for 6 shillings or something like that.
Now, Perker also, I mean, he recognizes that that he's going to have that to save her. Pickwick has to give money to the people, Dodson and Fogg, the men who are, doing all this. And this is what he doesn't want to do. But to kind of allay this a little, she has already written a letter, a voluntary statement under her hand that this business was from the very first fomented and encouraged and brought about by these men, Dodson and Fogg, meaning that they were the ones that convinced her to sue him. And that's not legal. But as I mentioned way back when we did this original breach of promise, this became a very, very quickly, this became a practice for lawyers. As soon as breach of promise trials started to really happen and people are getting well known in this time period in the early 19th century, lawyers started to go out and find people to do this, much like you have today with lawyers searching out accident victims and that kind of stuff.
Ambulance chasing, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's
But this was really, they would, I mean, as long as the women were willing to say, yes, he said I'd marry him, or he'd marry me, that was a case.
right.
And in some way he said that, that was a case. And they knew perfectly well that the juries like to find for the women anyway, and often would. And even in the cases where they really didn't believe it, they would usually find for her, but if they didn't think the man did much wrong, he wouldn't pay any damages, but he'd just have to pay the costs of the case.
And the lawyers got their piece.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
lawyers always get their piece in this.
I would also argue that women's agency and their status in the courts was not an all-time low, but was still very, very poor compared to men. Yeah. And so, if they were unmarried, particularly, they had very little as far as standing when it came to, someone who may have taken advantage of them or promised marriage, in reality promised marriage, and therefore took liberties, at the time, that was then something that would make their value as a marriageable woman less.
Yeah.
So it was a real damage. And so I'm not going to say that there isn't.
It depends on class.
Yes. Right. There isn't real damage happening, but in this case, it is a comedic interpretation of that as just a usury, through the. Yeah.
Well, Pickwick is going to have to pay for this. And
one phrase that was really great there is those Freeman Court sharks. I really liked that. I think Perker used that one to refer to Dodson and Fogg. Like, that makes so much sense to me. That they're just these sleazy.
Think about sleazy lawyers being called sharks.
Yeah.
It goes back a while.
And then the habeas corpus, which I believe they Weller kind of shoehorns into have his corpus. Or have his corpse, which, if you've read Dorothy Sayers, there's actually a story called Have His Carcass. And
that's what it is, have his carcass.
And I didn't realize it, but that may have been a Pickwickian reference.
Where she grabbed it. Yeah. It's very likely.
So,
well, they but even having that, Perker tells Pickwick that, we're probably not going to be able to do anything with that. Like, even though she's written out saying they're at fault for this, to get it through the courts, it was still going to cost. And that's not worth pursuing.
It would cost you more to get
vindicated. And they've made sure that they've got the right paperwork, Dodson and Fogg, to protect themselves. So just know that even with this, you're not going to be able to go after them, but it at least gives him something. At least gives him the person who defeated him in court said it was not your fault, and it at least has that going for it, that kind of honor going for it.
Exactly. He considers himself a white knight. He has the code of chivalry, and the final thing too is that Perker says if you remain in prison, there's an assumption of guilt. That society will view you as guilty even if you weren't, because you remained in prison. When if you weren't guilty, you could have just gotten out. So there's a number of different forces squeezing him out of the debtor's prison here.
And this is what we get here. We get this kind of, and what will happen through this through the serial part, or at least these two chapters, is the idea of Pickwick as what I called to you, and you asked me about the god of benevolence in this novel. And he begins this. Think about the beginning of this novel. He is not just naive and innocent, but he's also foolish. He is someone in those first few parts that he is so gullible that you laugh at him.
He believes there's a 160-year-old horse. Yeah.
And he's just ridiculous all the time. And then as it goes on, Dickens has developed Pickwick's naivete into a kind of like the way he looks at all the goodness in life, but also he's able to give that to people to alleviate their suffering. And this is that kind of, I thought that G.K. Chesterton had used that God of benevolence phrase, but actually Chesterton didn't. He said the novel, there's a sense of everlasting youth, and he says a sense as of the gods gone wandering in England. That Chesterton looked at this book as these kind of like, they're almost like, he says, Mr. Pickwick is a fairy, so was old Mr. Weller. This does not imply that they were suited to swing in a trapeze of gossamer. It merely implies that they had fallen out of it on their heads. That if they had fallen out of it on their heads, they would not have died. But to speak more strictly, Mr. Samuel Pickwick is not the fairy, he's the fairy prince. That is to say, he's the abstract wanderer and wanderer, and that they're these kind of supernatural beings, old pagan gods, and for Pickwick in this case,
Greek gods, right?
Yeah.
That go along and bless. Okay, all right, I see that.
The kind of, and that's I mean, it's a good reading for the way Dickens has developed Pickwick into this figure that everybody else looks up to and honors him, and they're all so almost in awe of this benevolent view he has of the world. When
he's basically Elon Musk of the early Victorian era, right? The way we all view Elon Musk, right? God among men.
Yeah, no, not anymore.
No, okay.
He had a good reputation at one point. Now he's grumpy old billionaire. So
I can't see the comments, but I'm just imagining everyone going, no.
Yeah. No grumpy billionaires allowed here. And so this is the Pickwick that we really see here. But before we get to see that, Winkle will arrive. And before Winkle arrives, I want to take a brief moment to thank all of you for watching this episode, and to remind you, as a nonprofit organization, the Rosenbach Museum and Library depends on the generosity of friends and supporters like you to keep programs like this free and accessible to hundreds of fellow Dickens lovers worldwide. You can donate to the Rosenbach on our website. You could also become a member. Membership gives you free museum admission, discounts on programs and courses, exclusive invitations to member-only events. You can learn more about how to become a member on our website. Remember, Rosenbach membership also makes a great gift. And also, membership gives you early access to program and course registration. And actually, just this week, our new programs and courses, in person and online, were put for the fall, are now online, and you can go and for the fall 2024, and you can go and check those out. It's Delancey Society can register now. Next week, it'll be next Friday, members only. And then after that, the general public. So if you want, early access is a great way, is a great benefit to Rosenbach membership. And it enables me to do these shows for free, which, is what I hope you all will support.
Absolutely. Well, I viewed partially the Sherlock Holmes How to the Baskervilles serial that was for pay. I viewed that as a donation to the
Yes,
library, but
certainly.
it is not my only donation, and I plan to become a an ongoing sponsor because I
And you
love the
hosted. You could have
yeah.
gotten it for free because you were a host. Clearly,
No,
you're working.
that's not how it works. I love the programs you put together, and I am a vehement recommender of participating in these. And it's so much more fun to read together than it is to read alone, even though reading alone is a lot of fun. Is that Gandalf the Gray over there? I can't see too
Yeah,
good.
I got a long pipe now for this one. I just haven't smoked this in a while with the long stem on it.
We're gonna pull out some pipes.
There you go.
There's your church warden on the wall there, I see too.
We won't, yeah, I got a couple behind me. We won't, or one behind me, one's next to me. We won't talk about the long pipes until later, until we hear
Yep,
about Dutch pipes
there
and
you go.
thing. But let's get back to the story then. Parker and Pickwick are, before he can really give a final answer, he is interrupted by a lady. And a lady says she's something very particular to disclose. And Mr. Pickwick says, I can't see her. And then we get a Wellerism. Do you have the Wellerism? Do you have the text there? Do you want to read the
I
Wellerism?
don't have it, but I noted that
Okay.
it's as the Robin Redbreast should have said when he
Well, read the whole thing. If you know
okay.
who was near, do you have the whole thing?
Yeah, let's see if I can find it here. Um will you see, sir? Yes. All right. So if you knowed who was near, sir, I rather think you'd change your note, as the hawk remarked to himself, with a cheerful laugh, when he heard the robin redbreast a singing round the corner.
Yes. So if you knew who was here, I think you change your note, as the hawk said to the robin redbreast. You
When he
know,
heard
it's
him
a
singing
joke.
around the
There's the
corner.
joke in it. That's pretty good Wellerism, though.
It is.
Like all
This-
Wellerisms, as I commented, you have to think a second afterwards. Like, what?
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
have to put it together.
Go back, yeah, read that court report again.
Well, the two conspirators, as it's spelled, enter, and it's Winkle and Arabella, the lady with the fur top, the fur around the tops of her boots,
In
uh,
modern parlance, it's
from
the
Dingley
face
Dell.
with the fur. When she walked in, the whole room was looking at her.
Yeah. They are married. Um, and we get an illustration, and let's share that first illustration. Oops, not there. This is the first Phys illustration for this issue, and it's here.
This is all in the frontis matter of the pamphlet, right? So they would have had to flip back to the beginning to understand.
Yeah, to go back and see the illustration.
Yeah, because
Because
the
they see them
plates.
first. They see
Yeah,
them first, and then the story. So, and I do imagine that happens, that there's a lot of flipping back and forth, when you get to a scene with an illustration, like, oh, that's one of the ones in the front, and you go back. They But here they are coming in. She's looking very demure, but she's in her wedding gown with the big veil. Here's Winkle, bowing his obeisance to Pickwick, who's shocked to see them. And here's
scratching the brim of his nose with his hat in obeisance.
and here's
Out of
Sam
respect.
and Mary, and these are he's done the ceilings and walls here is a little run down, but Pickwick's living okay here in the prison because he has money, so he can have this nice room. He's got everything he needs in here. But there's actually, and it exists. The original drawing that Fizz did for this is a little bit different.
Hmm.
And let me share that. And then Dickens had some notes for it. Now, the image I have to share is from the pictorial Pickwick book that I own. This drawing is in the New York Public Library.
Huh.
Pretty sure of that. I don't have that in my notes right here. I'm pretty certain this is from the New York Public Library, that they have this in their collection. Yes, I'm sure of it. They do. And you can find it online on their site. And the picture's not quite as good as the one I was able to take here from my book. But here they all are, and it's a little bit different. And there's a note here that's a little bit been cut off, and somebody must have at some point cut this, trimmed this sheet down, whatever it was. It's this big, and it was trimmed down because it says, "Are Sam and the housemaid clearly made out?" And there's something.
And then if you're looking on.
No, I think this is a TTER, actually.
Oh, okay.
Something if he were looking on with his arm around something, rather question the accuracy of the housemaids. We don't have anything else. So, oh, it's I rather. No, it is.
Yeah.
I rather question the accuracy of the housemaids. This could have been better, and better if he were looking on with his arm round. Maybe it said her here. But what happened? See, here Sam just has her hand here. He's holding. Look, and there's housemaids here. What the hell are housemaids doing in the prison? Fizz has put them in there. And here's the two of them together. And obviously it's reversed because the engraving. It's engraved, and it comes out in reverse for the engraving for the issue. And so Fizz corrects it, and notice here, look, he has Sam, instead of having his hand here on her shoulder, he's brought it all the way around to her waist. And the housemaids are gone. So, like, they don't belong there in the prison.
The room on the right in the etching feels bigger because of the way the ceiling is portrayed.
This is a little bigger, though. I wonder, because this is like the I think the image I have here is it's bigger. So
yeah.
Yeah, he's filled in more. There's more filled in.
This feels less claustrophobic than the other, which could have been small. Yeah.
This is a little more filled in.
It's wonderful.
And the stuff on the wall here now, this shelf is empty, and here are some books. And this will change in the later, because after so many impressions, Fizz had to redo the engravings. And so there are changes in later engravings, and I think there's some changes that happen up on the wall. I think maybe the shelf no longer is empty or something in the later ones, but in the first one it is.
Oh, and look at that. In the painting, it contains maybe a punch bowl and a bottle.
Up here?
I know, on the left side.
Oh, here. Yeah, up here. But this is things that are on the shelves anyway in the closet that he has here. There's a big bowl up here. But I love this, and it's Dickens' instruction that Sam needs to be a little more
amorous.
Yeah, with his arm around her and get rid of the housemaids. So, and he does.
That's fascinating, Ed. I love this. This is another thing that I just wouldn't have discovered without your tutelage.
So Pickwick is overjoyed at seeing them. There's no, like, Winkle's been so nervous about telling him that he's married her in secret, but Pickwick is just, she comes in right away. Well, she leads it. "Oh, Mr. Pickwick, can you forgive my imprudence?" And Mr. Pickwick returned no verbal response to this appeal, but he took off his spectacles in great haste, seizing both the young lady's hands in his, kissed her a great number of times, perhaps a greater number than was absolutely necessary, and then, still retaining one of her hands, told Mr. Winkle he was an audacious young dog and bade him get up. So he doesn't have to forgive him because Mr. Pickwick doesn't see anything to forgive here. These young lovers have been able to unite, and he is happy for them. And then it's interesting here. He says, she thanks Sam for helping, and he's like, "Oh, I only assisted." And then we get the other Ellerism. She's like, "Thank you for your assistance," and he says, "Don't say nothing whatever about it, ma'am. I only assisted nature, ma'am," as the doctor said to the boy's mother after he bled him to death. That's a good one. I like that Ellerism.
I only assisted nature.
I just assisted nature as I killed him. That's what we doctors do when we bleed
Mhm.
people to death. So
Well, there's
doctors
another
don't come off
reference.
well in Dickens usually.
There's
So
another there's another reference later on in the Bagman's tale that when his uncle fell off the carriage and hit his head and they bled him. Once he was bled, he felt much better.
yeah. Um, but then after that, Pickwick says, "Mary, my dear, this is the housemaid Sam's in love with. Mary, my dear, sit down." That's an unusual thing. Pickwick is inviting one of the servants to take a seat. So, and then he turns to Arabella and says, "How long have you been married?" She looked bashfully. Now, I don't like at first I thought, could it have been a typo? Could it have been like he meant to say Arabella sit down? But it's specifically there says Mary. And cutting short these compliments, like he's talking, like they know, like that's who he's directed at, Mary and Sam talking together. And what it means is that's the kind of guy Pickwick is, that he's going to even tell the servants to have a seat.
Well, especially because he knows the relationship between Sam
Yeah.
and her.
Um, Arabella now gets to play the rest of this up. Like, not only do you need to get out of prison, to pay the cost to get out of prison, but you need to get out of prison because you have to help us.
Obi-Wan, you're
Yeah,
my only hope.
you're my only hope.
Bringing the completely topical and timely references here.
He must tell her brother. He's the one that has to break the news to her brother. Dear Mr. Pickwick, he must only know it from you, from your lips alone. And she says, "I have never ceased to think how great your sufferings must have been in this shocking place, but I hoped that what no consideration for yourself would induce you to do, a regard to our happiness might." And on top of that, they said they also want him to break the news to Nathaniel's father, Mr. Winkle Sr., because he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know his son has just suddenly got married to this woman with no fortune or very little fortune to bring to the marriage. So 1,000 pounds she's got. So, but Mr. Winkle didn't give his permission for his son to marry. That's the point here. So Pickwick is finally overcome. Mr. Pickwick fairly argued and remonstrated out of all his resolutions. Finally says, yes, he has to, and he can't, because he can't find it in his heart to stand in the way of young people's happiness. And they send off Job. Sam, do the others get there yet? Have they gotten in? Tupman and Snodgrass arrive now, so all the Pickwickians are there.
Bingle,
And
Joe. Yep.
they send Job off. Sam right away sends Job off to Mr. Pell, who is the lawyer for his father, so Sam can get free. Um, and then Sam invests his whole stock of ready money in the purchase of 25 gallons of mild porter, which he himself dispensed on the racket ground to everybody who would partake of it. Everybody in the prison is what he's doing. He's buying everybody a drink, 25, gallons of porter. And then he hurrahed in divers parts of the building until he lost his voice. Sam is celebrating everything. I mean, this is like such an ending here, is what this is.
Mm-hmm.
And then Pickwick goes around and he's going around the prison and the throng of debtors who pressed eagerly forward to shake him by the hand. In all the crowd of wan, emaciated faces, he saw not one which was not happier for his sympathy and charity. Pickwick's been helping everybody all along, and this is what he does. This is who he is in this novel now, and everybody looks to him, and they're happier for being in his presence. And now there's some deal with Jingle, but we don't find out what it is yet. He says to Perker, with Jingle, Perker says to Jingle, "You will see me again, young man, tomorrow. I hope you may live to remember and feel deeply what I have to communicate, sir." So There's some plan with Jingle, but we don't know what it is yet. We'll find that out in a later issue. Um, and and then Pickwick says, "You've delivered the little parcel I gave for your old landlord, Sam." And that is, by landlord, he means the guy that Sam has been paying to live in the room at the prison.
Guy
And
who lived under the table because he
yeah,
liked a four-poster.
who was the cobbler. And the cobbler was also the friend of the Chancery prisoner that Pickwick had rented from and who had just died. So, and the cobbler and this landlord of Sam was the one that was at the bedside of the Chancery prisoner at the end. And Sam says the cobbler, he says, he bust out a crying, sir, and said you was very generous and thoughtful, and he only wished you could have him inoculated for a galloping consumption, for his old friend as had lived here so long was dead, and he'd nowheres to look for another. Poor fellow, said Mr. Pickwick, God bless you, my friends. And then he uttered his adieu. The crowd raised a loud shout. Many among them were pressing forward to shake him by the hand again, when he drew his long arm through Perker's and hurried from the prison, far more sad and melancholy for the moment than when he had at first entered it. Alas, how many sad and unhappy beings had he left behind? And there's the narrator coming in to remind us of this, terrible social condition, the terrible conditions of prisoners and a debtor's prison, and how much they have to suffer. Dickens was all, about, reforming these kinds of things in society. And that's the kind of narrator that jumps in a lot. You had asked about narrators before, and I feel like I don't mention Dickens as narrator enough. And what I should do is not call him Dickens, but call him Bose, because as narrator, he's always present. And it's something that he began crafting when he was doing his sketches, this narrator's voice. But in Pickwick, it's such a big part, and that the narrator's almost like another character, always there to comment on things.
And from the start, right?
Yeah.
Like, this isn't Pickwick and his story. This is us getting told the story inside another story. And so we're present with
Bose.
with the narrator Bose,
and
who's
Bose
actually a real character in this story. And so it's the more meta of but we've forgotten it, right? I've certainly don't think of it that way anymore. But the narrator is now injecting himself into the story at different points, and it's a really interesting way to tell a story. And adds another layer of depth.
And it's all through Dickens' work, like to the very end. The narrator is a very strong component of the story. The narrator has a personality. The narrator is, has a kind of character, and it changes some as he goes along. Early on, it's Bose, and later novels, it's Charles Dickens. But these earlier ones, it's more of this persona that he's taken on.
And when he's reading these to people, he is the narrator, right? So his public speeches are absolutely 100% Charles Dickens,
And remember, too, as so many of these issues are being read out loud by people in,
bars
and all over the place, who they're reading them to people who perhaps can't read, or just because they're reading them just because it's enjoyable to be read aloud. And he's given a way for these to be read out loud and to entertain people.
You can tell how important this particular passage is too. If you look at the punctuation in there, there's 5 exclamation points, 3 of them within the same sentence. Alas! Exclamation point. What's the other one? How many unhappy beings had he left behind? Exclamation point. And how many of them lie there caged there still? Exclamation point. And it's like, wow, I've never seen a writer do that. I mean, you think my writing is pretty bad. No, but like, he's putting them in the sentence.
Is there an extra line in there? Hold on.
I also really like the reference to a mild porter.
Oh my gosh, I don't have it. I had, and I don't have that line
You
on
don't.
a text from online. I wonder if this was edited out. It
This
says,
is, I'm looking at the PDF here.
yeah, the PDF. It says, alas, how many sad and unhappy beings had he left behind, and how many of them lie caged there still? And
You don't have the exclamation
I
points in it?
think in later editions, he took out that lie cage there still.
Ah, interesting. So you're reading the hard copy.
Yeah, well, the book edition that would have
Okay.
been later editions published,
Ah,
I
well,
think
and yeah,
that
it's you've
goes
got the
with it.
manuscripts there too, so you can check the original.
Well, we don't have that, and that
Oh,
manuscript
okay.
page doesn't exist
Ah,
for that chapter.
how do you know that off the top of your head, Ed? That's
Oh
amazing.
yeah, there's a few. Yes, because some editions don't seem to have this line. And
And this is
in
why access to the manuscripts
yep,
is so
yep, and
wonderful.
later. So, and
Yeah.
I should have checked this because I could have had this note in the Oxford Clarendon. I could have checked and found
Uh,
that that last line was cut.
Interesting.
So, and that's a powerful line. Lie cage there still.
Right. I wonder if there was pressure from powers that be to excise that because it was too judgmental.
Or he just cut it,
Could be.
or some typesetter missed it. I mean, it's the end, it's the last phrase of a chapter that also ends in an exclamation point. The kind of thing setting type, exclamation
Well,
point, and then you kind
there's
of didn't notice that there was an like that you missed one.
if you look at well, it's not the very last phrase. If you go one, two, three, four, five paragraphs up, as Mr. Pickwick uttered this adieu,
Yeah,
that's the last phrase there that says, alas, exclamation point, how many sad and unhappy beings had
yeah.
been left behind and how many of them lie caged there still. And then later I've got three or four more, well, five more paragraphs. A happy evening
Oh
was
yeah, and that still occurs. A happy
okay.
evening down to go if they had been to end the chapter. That part's still there, but
Got it.
I think it could have only been a mistake in in
Typesetting.
typesetting, or it could have been cut. Dickens could have just cut that line as he's, going
Interesting.
through a later edition because he does very lightly edit his works when they are published in book form.
Hmm.
Um, and I just don't know how early. Is it the very first book form that it's cut out, the first edition, the first print edition of Pickwick, or is it a later edition? That is what I don't know.
What does that last line mean? I wish them horses had been 3 months and better in the fleet, sir. The fleet prison, right?
Yes.
He wanted the horses to go faster because if they had been in prison for 3 months, they'd be all raring to go out.
Yes, the
Okay.
horses. He says the horses are because they're not going very quickly, right?
Huh.
No, they were speedily deposited, and yeah, like
It's just
if
a
they
weird,
had been in the fleet for 3 months like us, they'd
yeah.
be they'd be getting out of there quicker. They'd be taking us even quicker to where we
How,
want to go.
how
They
they
have
would
a party.
go.
Well, first they party in the Georgian Vulture, and then this is the next day. So, all right, let's get through this. We're really rambling, which is good.
That's what I do.
We're going long today, people. Um, because the next chapter, we still have two chapters to go. The next chapter is uh 48. Ben Allen and Bob Sawyer relates how Mr. Pickwick, with the assistance of Samuel Weller, essayed to soften the heart of Mr. Benjamin Allen and to mollify the wrath of Mr. Robert Sawyer. I think it's actually the reverse. I think it's the wrath of Benjamin Allen he has
Hmm.
to. No, I guess it's both. They're both angry and they're both need their hearts softened. And, well, we'll get to.
One of them is murderous. The other one is just
Well, they
annoyed.
both are. They
Makes
both say they're going to
makes
murder.
threats. Yeah,
So,
well, one wants to fight a duel and one is about to choke a guy out.
yes. And then, but Alan wants to also do it like
Right.
his sister. He's cutting her out of his life. She's not
Yeah.
going to be his sister anymore. So,
Yep.
well, it's always fun with these guys because they're just, drunk and do, good for nothings who are just enjoying themselves all the time. And they're funny characters,
They are
not admirable characters.
not likable at all.
No, but enjoyable to watch in their, kind of, uh, and in the way they approach their life.
Oh, I had one quick note on the last chapter before we actually make progress.
Uh-huh.
So when Sam Weller's old landlord received a package, which I assume is money, like it's some sort of gift, like parting gift.
Yeah.
He says, "I wish you'd inoculated me for the galloping consumption." When I first read that, I was thinking inoculated me against it because of my, previous roommate had died. But no, as I read through it here, he's saying, "I wish you had given me an illness that would kill me because I don't want to live anymore because my only friend has died." Right?
Yes.
Like, he is more miserable now than ever. And he's just saying, thanks, but like, just kill me now.
Yes.
Ugh.
I only wish you could have him inoculated for a consumption because
Right.
that's what
When I think of inoculations, though, I don't think of give me the illness. Yeah.
Yes. Well, he only wishes you could have because he can't because he's, like this. Yes, you're right. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. And I didn't mean to derail it, but that's something that I didn't pick up the first time through because
There's no such thing as derailing anything with the Pickwick Papers. This is, I mean, it's not, Tristram Shandy, but it's,
sure.
it's still, it's just things are unfolding as they
Well,
unfold.
I really am I'm out of punch and I should have brought a beer to sharpen my intellect.
You need something. I've got a whole picture of this stuff. I'm just
I
drinking.
know. You get started on the chapter. I'm going to run and get a beer to sharpen my
You go
intellect
do
because I
that,
think
and
it's necessary.
I'll start telling everybody this chapter. Well, Ben Allen and Bob Sawyer, they're in their little surgery behind the shop discussing minced veal and future prospects, of which they have none. I mean, the prospects of Sawyer, of this, Robert Sawyer, late Nakamorph, doctor's office, apothecary, ever making money are dubious, they call it. What's rather dubious? Why the chances, responded Bob Sawyer. And Ben Allen says, I forgot, said Mr. Ben Allen. The beer has reminded me that I forgot, Bob. Yes, they are dubious. So, and there's the beer. So, look at you.
I'm the upper class.
The champagne of beers in a can,
Right.
no less. Because champagne's best in a can.
Mm-hmm. They make a fine champagne in a can now for just about every brand, which is how full circle we've come. That is one of my favorite lines of this passage too, is I forgot, but the beer has reminded me.
Yes, because that's what it does for them. Well, we find out that Allen really wants Sawyer to marry Arabella now because she gets £1,000 when she's either married or comes of age, and she's a year away from coming of age. So if she gets married now, she'll get the £1,000, meaning her husband will get the £1,000, and then Ben Allen can continue to drink off of his friend's £1,000 that is his sister's, and that's the only reason that they want her to marry him. That, but at least Sawyer recognizes that. He says, it happens, unfortunately, that she doesn't have a single blemish, or the single blemish is a want of taste. She don't like me. Like Sawyer knows that she's not interested in him. Allen won't hear that at all. Like, of course she is. She's meant for you. She's going to marry you. Sawyer realizes that she doesn't actually like me. And I think that'll help him later get over it.
Yep.
But they
they're eating a minced veal pie, right?
Yes.
Now remember, we had talked about veal pie way earlier in the series, or you had talked about it, but that veal pie from a reputable veal salesman was generally cat or dog.
Yeah, it was not veal, people.
That they had the ability to make taste like anything, veal or pheasant or beef, as whatever spice they put in it.
When I was a kid, we used to have veal, and my mom made it. It was like just breaded, whatever. And we had veal, and we all ate it, and we didn't think anything of it. And it wasn't like this, like tender, like melt in your mouth. So it was like we were like, oh, mom just gets cheap veal. No, we found out years later.
Don't tell me. Don't tell me. Fido was missing.
No, no, it was venison. And But here's the weird part is my mom thought we would be upset if we knew we were eating venison like Bambi.
Okay.
Instead, we're eating these tender little
Baby
baby calves.
cows. Yeah.
And that's fine to eat these poor little baby calves. It's not like like that was her thinking that
Yeah.
like that's what we like. And it's just bizarre. And
It
I
is.
remember when I found this out, we were like young adults. We were like, what?
Yeah. It makes no sense.
It
Well,
wasn't even good.
my only experience with veal was veal parmigiana from one of those encore like family style dinners. And I love those. Like those when I was growing up, I would make those myself, which meant just like throwing them in the oven for 40 minutes. But when I actually went to an Italian restaurant on the first date with my future wife, as a matter of fact, I ordered veal parmesan and she almost walked out of the restaurant. And she said, "If you ever order veal again, I'm not going to talk to you." And I was like, I just wanted to try it. I've never had it in a real restaurant. And it was not very good. I didn't love it because what I loved was the mozzarella, Parmesan cheese, tomato sauce, sugar, and breading. And whatever you do with that, like chicken Parmesan, right?
Yeah.
It's the same flavor. You're eating it for the breading. But
Good veal is good veal.
apparently, I'm
It
not a
really
veal
is.
guy.
But
Like
the
it
venison,
tastes
I
like
think
cruelty.
the venison came from my uncle who was a big deer hunter.
Yeah.
So that's why we had it.
Yeah.
But my mom didn't want it. Maybe she didn't want it. Maybe she thought we would like, oh, we can't eat it. He just killed it. Like I don't understand the reasoning, but anyway.
So my grandfather was a farmer. He raised cattle, rather, he raised beef for butchering. And because the family would get too attached to them otherwise, he always named them after politicians he didn't like. So for a long time, we had Nixon steaks in the fridge, in the freezer. And so,
See, I don't want to eat that. Then
no,
I'm
I
like, I
don't
don't want to
either.
eat a Nixon steak. Are you
Nope,
kidding me?
nope, exactly.
Um,
So that's my experience with the curated beef industry.
there you go.
Yeah,
Well, they're eating a veal pie here, and yes, I think Dickens' audience understands that they're
yes,
they're not wealthy enough to eat a real veal pie.
yep,
um, and they're also threatening here. Like, like Allen thinks that like I think she's interested in somebody, my sister, and I should assassinate him, Bob. And Sawyer says, I'd put a bullet in him if I found out. And we'll get more later what he's going to say. Oh, no, this is where he says it. He says, I'd put a bullet in him if I found out. If that didn't do his business, I'd extract it afterwards and kill him that way.
yeah, yeah.
Which
And
reminded you of?
James Garfield's assassination, of course. I think we all went there, right? President Garfield was shot in, I believe was it Baltimore or Washington, D.C., and did not die. But, famously, this is where Alexander Graham Bell and others, including I'm Slocum, I'm misremembering the name, but there was just a presentation in Minnesota about a Canadian American scientist who helped devise this contraption to locate the bullet within Garfield's body so that they could extract it and possibly save his life. Because it wasn't just the acute injury, but you also get sepsis. You also get, the leaching of the heavy metals into the system that is poisoning him.
Yeah.
So they and the doctors around him poked and prodded at the bullet hole, trying to find the projectile. They used this. Well, unfortunately, they used what we'd now call like an interferometer or a metal detector to locate the metal fragment in his body. But he was actually on a relatively new invention, a steel spring mattress. And so, despite their best efforts, they never located the bullet. So, modern day medicine being what it is, they think back to this time when physicians didn't wash their hands. And what they were doing was introducing all sorts of pathogens
Yeah.
and bacteria into the wound. He eventually would succumb to an infection and basically sepsis. And it wasn't the bullet we think now that killed him, it was the treatment. And George Washington's another famous president where the physician may have
They
been the
bled him
worst.
to death.
Yeah,
Right.
bled him to death for a sore throat, which probably was strep.
in this case, Sawyer, being a doctor, he could
Mhm.
do this, or a surgeon, doctor, whatever he is, would be the one to extract the bullet. And even if, like, even given all those real conditions, Sawyer's going to kill you anyway.
Right.
Bob Sawyer is not the one you ever want
He's a
to.
terrible doctor. Yeah, like he's just, I'll extract the bullet and most likely kill him, even if he did his best, right?
I like the idea that he would extract the bullet because he can as a doctor and then shoot him again with it. But that's not so.
Well, so I'm a martial artist by training as well. And one of the things is that at a certain level you're trained, and this is probably true of every military training in history, is that you're trained to both first protect yourself and injure other people. Injure and hopefully kill is part of martial training. But you also need to know first aid. And usually it's to help one of your allies, but you could very well, help an enemy. And so it just reminded me of how when you get to a certain level of martial arts, a lot of your training is how to fix yourself and others when you've really seriously injured them. And it's just such an odd place to put that type of training, but nobody needs it until you're an effective killer. You don't really need first aid if you can't do anything bad to somebody else.
Well, Sawyer's supposed to have these skills, but he likely doesn't.
Yeah, he bought the practice, right? He just purchased it, and they said it was an extensive practice. And I think he was maybe making the same joke I've heard before. It's like, well, he needs a lot more practice.
Yeah. um, they and now he goes on, and we're going to get through this chapter so we can get to the final tale.
Yep.
They uh Arabella's never given Sawyer any reason to think that she loved him, and
Always
so
slighted his affections.
yes, so we have that going all through, but it's a fun scene, and this is
Yes.
one of those scenes that it's really fun to read their interactions, the stories they tell, just all the things that they go through. Is it's Dickens really creating this scene where we have these two very disreputable drunks, but it's also funny to watch them and going through everything they go through. Well, the aunt arrives, an old woman on a carriage, a private fly, actually not a carriage, and her surly looking man servant Martin. They arrive, and it's Allen's aunt, and they quickly have to cover up their smoking and drinking as they get putting the spirits and water out of sight, upsetting nauseous drugs to take off the smell of the tobacco smoke in this
Yeah, oh,
one.
it smells terrible in here. Yeah, we were just mixing up some prescriptions.
um well, she comes in, and right away they think, oh, you must need help. Sawyer pulls her into the back office, puts her in a chair, and he's like, okay, what's the matter with you? Oh, you're nervous. Camphor julep and water 3 times a day and composing draft at night. Like, he's prescribing drugs there, because this is how he treats people. Like this is the treatment that he gives people. He makes money by selling them drugs. So
And snake oil, I
yeah,
mean,
and it's not
camphor
all of it.
julep.
Yes.
Yeah.
And and so he's prescribing her things here, and then she says, oh no, it's not my head, it's not, it's my heart, I think it's an affair of the heart.
It's the stomach, ma'am. Yeah.
So yeah, but he won't hear of that, and he's trying to prescribe, and then she finally comes out with it that uh 3 days ago Arabella went on a pretended visit to her sister, another aunt, and now she's written to say that she's
Well,
married.
and she doesn't even tell him that. She draws it out. He's like, hurry up and tell me.
Yes.
She's like, let me tell you about the school with the laburnum tree and an oak gate. And as I was about to tell you, she came back. No, she didn't.
She spoke with the most tantalizing deliberation, as old ladies often do. So she's drawing it out. Finally tells him that and then Bob's reaction is, Ben, my boy, she's bolted. Um, Arabella has run away. But of course, Arabella is just property to Ben, and even in Bob's eyes, she's just like a horse, that has ran away, or a cow that has ran away. That's all they think of her as. Um, uh, Ben goes crazy and just attacks Martin, the servant. Perhaps he had something to do with it when he just attacks him. And this is when, and I like how Martin the servant kind of takes the attack.
Huh. Until he
Because
realized he wasn't going to get paid anymore if he's dead.
yeah, he's, because, well, he's the servant. He's just kind of like, this is what you're going to choke me now. Okay, I guess that's what's happening. But then when he realizes, wait a minute, you're you're going to choke me out, and then he trips him up, and they're on the floor, and in comes Mr. Pickwick and Mr. Samuel Weller, who in Sam thinks that clearly this is the doctor's office. Somebody's just trying to give medicine to somebody who doesn't want it. And so he's like willing to watch this. This is going to be fun to watch you guys, somebody force medicine on you. I'm not going to intervene, but Mr. Pickwick rises right away. Oh no. And they have to break it up. And Sam just wants to watch the fight. And then they do help break it up. And then your sister, and then he says, I'm here to tell you your sister is safe and well. And and Sam interrupts with another Wellerism, right? Yes. Your sister is safe and well, and I am here, my dear sir, too. Sorry to do anything as may cause an interruption to such very pleasant proceedings, as the king said when he dissolved the parliament. Cause any interruption to interrupt pleasant proceedings, as the king said when he dissolved the parliament. But there's an old lady lying on the ground here, fainted. And the aunt has passed out, and Weller says to bring out the Walla-Tilly. Not the brandy. It would have been brought out for the men, or is that even later? I don't remember. I know in Sherlock, it's always quick the brandy.
That's right. No, they have brandy and water later, but
which would be this would be the sal volatile smelling salts. Volatility, sal volatile. That's what he's saying. Smelling salts with these ammonia, distillation and salt. And break it or smell it in a little jar or something.
Yeah, and I mean, sal volatility or volatility is just smelling salt. It's like the volatile salt, right?
Well, they wake her up. Mr. Pickwick gives the news. She's happy. Arabella's happy and well in London. And Allen's like, sure's no object to me. And Sawyer's like, her husband is an object to me, sir. And he's going to kill him. Pickwick is trying to calm them down. Ben Allen deliberately crushed his spectacles beneath the heel of his boot, having picked up the pieces, put them into 3 separate pockets, folded his arms, bit his lips, and looked in a threatening manner at the bland features of Mr. Pickwick. I mean, just ridiculous behavior, which I think is very funny in this chapter. They and Mr. Pickwick has to get them together or hopefully calm them down. This is his job. This is what he's here for, is to break the news and to make everything okay within the family.
So he really was needed. I mean, it wasn't just an act. Arabella was absolutely correct that if he didn't get there, there'd be murder.
Before they could do that, Sam has to interrupt and says, well, first, Ben Allen says, this is the he realized that Sam, they find out that Sam has helped Mr. Weller, who is helped the couple get together. And the Martin, the servant, points him out that Sam was the one. And Ben Allen says, and this is the faithful creature, meaning Martin, whom I had nearly suffocated. Mr. Pickwick, how dare you allow your fellow to be employed in the abduction of my sister? And then a little bit later, Sam has to interrupt them all as they're trying to figure things out. And he says, I wish to make a very few remarks in addition to what has been put forward by the honorable gentleman as is just give over, said Mr. Weller, which is this here. An individual in company has called me a feller. He's very upset at being called a fellow. And this is something that has happened earlier in the novel. You could refer to somebody as a fellow, and it's all through the book. This good fellow, that good fellow, all through. And it's in general, it's okay. But when you call somebody a fellow, meaning, they're not, that they're just a common nobody, then it's an insult. And it happened in chapter 15, when Mr. Pickwick thought that Tupman's green jacket, when they went to the Mrs. Leo Hunter's party, and Tupman wanted to wear the green jacket, but he was too fat and ridiculous looking to wear it. And Pickwick says, "You're too fat and too old." "Too old," said Mr. Tupman. "And if any further ground of objection be wanted," continued Mr. Pickwick, "you are too fat, sir." You think that was like the real insult. "Sir," said Mr. Tupman, his face suffused with a crimson glow, "this is an insult." "Sir," said Mr. Pickwick, "it is not half the insult to you that your appearance in my presence in the green velvet jacket with a 2-inch tail would be to me." "Sir," said Mr. Tupman, "you're a fellow." "Sir," said Mr. Pickwick, "you're another." And then,
snap.
And even at the end of that, "You've called me old." "I have," said Mr. Pickwick, "and fat. I reiterate the charge. And a fellow. So you are." There was a fearful pause. And you can't say to somebody they're a fellow. But it's funny that it's a common word that they use it all the time. But then in a situation where suddenly it means you're not quite an equal to somebody, this fellow here, then it's insulting.
It's interesting. Rap battles have come a long way since these days, I gotta say. But the other passage here, we're right at the passage in question that I think is quite interesting. "Mr. Pickwick, how dare you allow your fellow to be employed in the abduction of my sister?" I demanded. "I demand that you explain this matter to me, sir." "Explain it, sir? It's a conspiracy, a regular plant, a disgraceful imposition." "Nothing but a do." This is where Pickwick goes, "Hey, I did not encourage this.
Yeah.
I was there, but I didn't do anything." And then Weller gets in trouble because he did encourage it and did facilitate it. But yeah, I like that a lot. They're reinforcing one another. There was a point earlier in the chapter, I'm just looking at my notes here, that I really appreciated because of the writing style. And it's something you don't notice until you read it a couple of times. But at one point when both of these guys are just being gross, like embodiment of male privilege, right? Talking about who owns Arabella because it's my sister and you should go marry her within a month. But they're, disgusting people. And in the narration specifically, instead of saying like "said Bob," it's like "quoth Mr. Robert Sawyer in reply." Like, again, it's this ironic stentorian phraseology that is stilted in a way that the scene just does not warrant.
No.
So that is the humor. It's irony. It's just the narration is chef's kiss. I
entirely agree. They Sam says no, that Arabella's never had a priory attachment. That's other pun that he's been running,
fire attachment.
Yes, she's got a prior. She didn't have a priory attachment. Nobody's cut him out, meaning Sawyer. And then Mr. Pickwick found a very powerful assistant in the old lady, and she admonishes Ben Allen, that "how dare you treat me with respect." And she kind of starts to bring him around. Bob Sawyer goes back with Pickwick to retire in a close conversation. And it's actually Pickwick doesn't convince him. It's after Mr. Sawyer was observed to apply himself several times to the mouth of a black bottle, under the influence of which his features gradually assumed a cheerful and even jovial expression, that he comes around and he proposes the health and happiness of Mr. and Mrs. Winkle. And then Ben Allen goes and gets the bottle, drinks the toast so heartily that the liquor being strong, he became nearly as black in the face as the bottle. It's the booze that brings them around, basically. They get drunk and then they're like, yeah, sure.
You know,
Okay.
this, yeah, well, and his face turns as black as the bottle, right? This reminds me a lot of one of my favorite quotes that I just looked up and quoted the other day to get it accurate, from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I'm not sure if it's in the original book by Hunter S. Thompson, but in the film, as your attorney, I advise you to take a hit out of the little brown bottle in my shaving kit. You won't need much, just a tiny taste.
Well, I wonder what that was.
Ugh, adrenochrome.
Laudanum. Um,
Well, I mean, they're compounding chemists, right? So they've got the strong stuff. It
yeah,
could be a mixture of cocaine and opium and who knows what else, morphine,
yeah.
all of the above. Hey, if that's what it takes to get over Arabella,
They are brought around. They're not going to murder anybody, cut anybody out, and
I love you guys.
the drink saves the day. And now the old lady is trying to get Mr. Pickwick. She says, "You'll take some tea, Mr. Pickwick," said the old lady with irresistible sweetness. The truth is that the old lady's evidently increasing admiration was Mr. Pickwick's principal inducement for going away. He thought of Mrs. Bardell, and every glance of the old lady's eyes threw him into a cold perspiration. No, no old widow is
Not
gonna.
again.
That's the
Not that
Witters. That's what Tony Weller warns him about. He warned you about the Witters. So Pickwick
gets out of there.
leaves. He and Sam are out and they go back to the inn that they're staying in and they discover that there is a gentleman with one eye and he and the landlord were drinking a bowl of Bishop together. A bowl of Bishop, we all know Smoking Bishop from Christmas Carol. That's the smoke, Scrooge and Bob Cratchit have a bowl of Smoking Bishop at the end of the book to discuss Bob's future prospects.
And it's a
Well,
brandy with, is it smoked nutmeg or is it smoked clove?
it's
Burnt?
it's port. It's port and spices and sugar.
Okay, but I thought the smoking came from like roasting the cloves that went into it. I looked it up a long time ago, but that's the difference between bishop and smoked bishop or smoking bishop, as far as I can recall.
As far as I know, Smoking Bishop is just hot. And here's the key now. The bishops are a bishop is any drink that it's port with, it could be sugar. It doesn't have to be sugar because port can be, sweet enough, but port with sugar, oranges, mulled with spices.
Hmm.
And actually all drinks with port are bishops. And at the end of this, we'll learn, at the end of this chapter, we learn that they're actually drinking Negus, Negus, which is named after like Admiral Negus, or I think it is, from the 18th century, who invented this drink.
Yeah,
Which
one
is
of the
basically-
Ferengi from Deep Space Nine. Mhm. Grand Negus.
But it is just that. It's Negus is, poured hot water, sugar, lemon, and spices. That's what it is. So that's what they're doing. But bishops always have port. But there are clerical brothers, and this is from Convivial Dickens. The hierarchy of bishops' clerical colleagues was determined by the color of the wine. If the drink is a pope, it's burgundy. Cardinal, champagne or Rhine wine. Archbishop is when you use claret or less frequently sherry or marsala, and a bishop is ruby port. A Protestant bishop is when you use claret and a little rum with lemons. And a church warden is Grand Roussillon with tea or ale, champagne, ginger, and cherry brandy. And a chorister is white wine with beaten eggs. And there's even a beetle, and that's the raisin and ginger wines. So,
Wow.
so there
What
are.
about, is that tawny port included in the raisin? Because that's what I think of when
I don't.
I
Maybe
didn't
I
hear
don't
tawny
know. I
port.
don't know where the tawny would fall in there. So
Probably just some kind of deacon or
yeah, but
altar
it's
boy.
certainly it's certainly not a bishop. But I love that if you do this with with Burgundy, if it's like Burgundy and sugar and spices, that's the Pope.
Why is it that the cardinal color? Oh, the cardinal is the color for different. Okay, okay. Because I think of cardinal as also being a color, and so if it's a
Yeah, red,
burgundy,
that red would
yeah.
be, yeah. But no, the Cardinal is Champagne or Rhine wine. So
Okay.
Burgundy is considered here the highest of all the wines.
There will be a quiz on this at the end of the program. Yes.
Well, we're going to go a little bit longer, obviously, and talk about this last chapter, the tale. But now because they've encountered this guy, this queer customer, the one-eyed one, sir, said Mr. Weller. He's smoking a large Dutch pipe. And what that probably means to Dickens is just a long churchwarden pipe. That's probably all he's referring to. Is that this is a Dutch pipe? It's a long churchwarden. That sometimes you think Dutch pipe means it's like porcelain and those like big, those droopy bowls. But
Yeah,
no,
it has a cuckoo clock in it.
that's more. Yeah, no, those larger ones that are porcelain, they're usually German pipes. Dutch pipe, for especially at this time, meant it was a long clay pipe.
You have a picture of yourself in the Dutch kitchen from New York.
I do. Yes.
Yeah, I mean that you're
All
willing
those
to
Dutch
share.
pipes hanging on the wall behind us.
Yes. That's an amazing place. If you're ever in New York and you want to experience Dutch 1700s
It's at
Dutch
the
life,
Grolier Club. I don't know if everybody can see that because that's literally the
the inner
the
sanctum.
break room for the
Well,
employees.
I'm just saying,
Yeah.
find your way to the Dutch tap house. It's called the Tapperage, and it's a reconstruction in the early 20th century. I think they reconstructed 14 or 1500s era Dutch tap house, like the Knickerbocker, founding members of New Amsterdam, what they would have been drinking in. So anyway, there's this wonderful picture of Ed just in his element of these, like the pipe racks that were the communal pipes at the time. This is
Yeah.
something that happened in London too. You'd take a pipe down off the wall, you'd fill it with tobacco, you'd use it, you'd put it right back up on the wall.
Yep. You don't need to bring your own. Pipes are there. Go in, landlord,
Now,
can have a pipe and a pipe and a bishop. And
those long church wardens too. I've heard the story that you could break the tip off if you were fastidious and worried about germs.
nobody was.
Okay.
I mean, it just would have. I mean, if it gets broken, then
Yeah.
it's not broken forever. Like there's still going to be enough stem on it to keep using it. So,
Do you want to talk about
and it's easier to put it in the fire.
Yeah.
Easier to light because they're lighting with flames, with brands and things. They're lighting it over flames, so it's the flame is away from you more. But also, you'd put it in the fire because once it gets all black, you stick it in the fire, leave it in there for a couple hours, bring it out, and it's white again. So
it burns all of the
Yeah.
organic compounds off.
takes
Now,
all the oils out. Yeah.
you wrapped up yours for ease of use. You'd wrap it with something
I
like
put wax on the end. It's
wax.
just like a seal wax that I put on the end.
Okay. You can also do leather, right? And it just makes it a little more comfortable to chew on.
It's just not like you're biting down on the hard clay.
And Holmes definitely used a church warden at times, but in this particular case, we don't know what a Dutch pipe is, but we think that it's a church warden, like on your wall back there too.
I have one back there. This is the other one from that. There's usually two back there.
There you go.
Back there. Next to my Gandalf staff. They so he's there smoking. Mr. Pickwick gets his brandy and water, and we realize that the one-eyed man, he's like, this is the same guy that told the story to Snodgrass and Tupman in the Eatanswill section of the serial. And then he told them the story about Tom Smart and the queer chair, another supernatural funny story that happens earlier. It was in chapter 14, number 5, serial number 5. So this is the same guy. And he's going to tell them a ladled out a glass of Negus from the bowl, a bishop, and smoked a long whiff out of the Dutch pipe, and begins his story, which is chapter 49, containing the story of the bagman's uncle.
Point of order. We use the term gammon a lot, or characters use the term gammon, meaning evil or something from the devil, right? I think that's like the original in
Is it?
interpretation. Because well, and in this particular place, it says that he's a queer customer, the one-eyed one, sir. He's a gammonin, that ere landlord he is, sir, till he don't rightly know whether he's a standing on the soles of his boots or the crown of his hat. Does that mean that he's somehow trying to trick him out of money or scam him? Or is
Hmm.
it just that he's lying and telling all sorts of tales?
Yeah, I just think he's a that kind of tale teller, that he's not telling you the truth kind of thing.
Sure, sure. He's like
Um,
a con artist.
you can't really believe him. Um, yeah, it's to hoax, deceive, hoodwink, trick. Um, I don't know. Where does that come from, though?
I will tell you that I tried to use charades.
Worthless, absolutely worthless is the original noun for that, a gammon.
Okay.
Um,
So is backgammon related to that? Like that that the opponent has not scored at all, so you have gammoned that opponent,
yeah,
meaning
it's a victory in backgammon. I don't know how it gets that use.
if that means nothing at all, if you have backgammoned someone, you have not only scored your own, but they have not even gotten a piece across the halfway mark. And
Don't know.
therefore it is I think that makes more sense than my interpretation. I don't think it's evil, although I think that might be a name for the devil, and that's why I was conflating the two. So
Don't know. But it's not a name
anyhow,
for the devil.
he's a
But
gammonin. He's a gammonin. He's backgammoning him so hard he doesn't know his crown from his
well,
boot.
he's going to tell the story. Before we do the story quickly. This is the ninth interpolated tale in Pickwick Papers, and the final one. Now, obviously, first readers don't know it's the final one, but it's the final one. Uh, the Stroller's Tale, The Convict's Return, Madman's Manuscript, The Bagman Story, which was the first one. That's the Tom Smart and the Queer Chair. The Parish Clerk, A Tale of True Love. Then The Old Man's Tale About the Queer Client. That's that very gothic, dark story where he watches the guy drown and to get his revenge. Um, and then the story of the goblins who stole a sexton. The True Legend of Prince Bladud, about the founder of Bath. And now this one, the story of the bagman's uncle. Sometimes it's called the ghost of a male, as a male coach, meaning, MAIL. But the way that these tales were, there was a tale in serial number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, and number 6, then number 8, and then number 10, and then 13, and now 17. You can see as it went on, Dickens couldn't put to. Now, I think a lot of people think like, oh, he threw a tale in there, we didn't have much to do. No, I think he wanted to tell these tales and they were fun, but as the story was moving along, there's no space for them. He's busy telling the story of, after number 6, and then especially after number 10, he's telling the stories about the characters. Like, he's got so much to tell about the characters now. I can't go and stop and have somebody tell tales.
He has to move the
Um,
plot along. There's a lot of plot resolution to do
he's
at this
he's
point.
come up with some plots
Yeah.
that have to move, and he has to tell those stories. So as it goes along, early on, it was expected. One of these, the first, issue 2 through 6, all had a tale in them. So readers were expecting it, but now they're hooked. You know, they're taking these issues anyway, and he can just focus on his characters and tell fewer tales.
I'm trying to
Um,
think of how that correlates to what you said earlier too about the circulation rising. Maybe that's how, like you say, he got him hooked and then they stuck around with it.
I
Was
think and lots of people have pointed this out. It's no coincidence that after Sam Weller comes in, it skyrockets.
yeah.
He's a great character, and people remember him, and they're coming for Weller. Um, but now they're all coming because this has been going on so long. It's always funny and entertaining.
Hmm.
So, but this is the last tale that we'll have now. Now he's really got to, he can only has time to tell the rest of the story once this is done, because there's only two more parts left, and well, three parts in two issues left. So this one is a ghost story, but it's also kind of a fun adventure story, isn't it? It's
It's
not
the
like
Three
a supernatural
Musketeers.
scary story.
Yeah,
It's an adventure that he has with ghosts, that he's kind of going back in time in a sense, maybe.
yeah. It's I would posit that this is an early time travel tale.
Yeah.
That this is the way that, without the mechanical explanations that we see in the modern era, people just fell asleep and ended up in the wrong era. Or they saw people who shouldn't be there. They thought of them as ghosts, but they weren't necessarily. It's that they were in a different time.
Yeah. And and it's very much like Goblin Who Stole a Sexton, the Christmas, story that's told earlier. It's about someone who gets drunk and then has this experience
Yep.
with supernatural maybe experience, and
Mhm.
then, wakes up at the end and it's like, what? It's all gone.
And
Um,
believes that it's all true.
yes.
That's the key, is that it's not a dream. This happened.
Yes. Um, the and it's also, it gives this book, because it's in Scotland, and we get all this Scottish detail. It
Mhm.
gives Dickens an opportunity to take us on another trip. Now we're going to Scotland. His characters didn't do it. He didn't get Mr. Pickwick and them up north all the way to Edinburgh, but I can do it in a story. And so that's what we get. We get all this kind of Scottish flavor in here, and he's also a drinker, the uncle. He's jolly. I mean, you talk about the Dickens narrator, the first, couple, 3-4 paragraphs of this story, that it's the Bagman's uncle telling the story, but this is real. This is Bose as well. This is
The Bagman telling the story of his uncle, right?
it seems like, yes, the Bagman telling the story of the uncle seems like the same narrator
Dickens.
as Bose, and how he's
Yeah.
describing people and this jolly guy. And he's a drinker and an eater. I think one of the reasons I love this novel is everybody's just drinking and eating all the time and having a ball drinking and eating. And all of the drinking that goes on here is just, uh, um, and then eating. And he's in Scotch. He has a Scotch breakfast and a bushel of oysters, dozen or so bottled ale, noggin or two of whiskey, and then punch. Talking about drinking. Then he has kippered salmon, Finian haddocks, a lamb's head, and a haggis, a celebrated Scotch dish, gentlemen, which my uncle used to say always looked at him when it came to table, very much like a Cupid's stomach. um,
That one I don't get, but it's hilarious and silly, and I love
has
it.
a whiskey toddy, um,
Mhm.
warm whiskey. And then they sing Willie brewed a peck of malt, which Dickens and his audience would have known was a well-known Robert Burns song. It's a Burns poem song that he wrote in
It's music.
1789. It's a drinking song, but it's also kind of a song about kind of the bond of the brotherhood, the bond of the drinkers. Um, I will put a link to the lyrics of Willie brewed a peck of malt in the chat. It's a famous song, and it's one that we always celebrate Burns Night at the Rosenbach. We have an extraordinarily wonderful Robert Burns collection at the Rosenbach. So always have a Burns Night celebration on January 25th every year. People all around the world celebrate Robert Burns. It's his birthday. And we always have a celebration with music, and we read poems, and we have great scotch, and we have a haggis, and the musicians who come from the South Jersey Celtic Society always wind up playing Willie Brewed a Peck of Malt. It's one of the more famous songs. Look, you can go on YouTube and you can find lots of different versions of it. It's a fun one.
When you see the haggis brought out, does it remind you of a Cupid's stomach?
It does not. It's just
Doesn't seem appetizing to me if that's what you think of.
Cupid and haggis don't go together for me.
Can I tell you the impression that I got of this story right at the beginning? Oh, go ahead if you wanted to
No,
keep.
go ahead.
Okay. So right at the beginning, it talks about what an ordeal eating and drinking that much was. You know, who could have had a supper and a dinner and, haggis and drunk all this, and a Dundee man drinking against a Glasgow man, and was it a bushel of oysters? I was absolutely transported back to New York City, January of this year, going from the Spode dinner to the, drinking festivities at Rosie Dunn's, going back to the rooms and drinking in the rooms, like having the smoking club outside the Rosie Dunn's. Like, I absolutely feel like we are Pickwickians and Sherlockians together
Sign me up.
as
Yep,
one.
this is what I do.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, I think that dovetails so nicely into the way that literate people gather and enjoy one another's company and get fun and have a lot of hijinks.
Certainly is the way you and I live, Max. So
Well, many,
more
many.
people, more people ought to. Yes. Well, and we find these other people. Like this is the way we
Yes.
approach it. We find these other people to
Fellow
enjoy
travelers.
life and enjoy each other's company. And this is a very Pickwickian thing to do.
Mhm. Do you
And
remember the Robert Burns poem that was recited?
I do. Now we're too far off.
All right, I'm not going to recite it, but it was an interesting poem I'd never heard before. Go ahead.
They yes. And anyway, so that's a big part of this story is that I think there's a trip to Scotland and we get all this Scottish flavor and a little Robert Burns, song mentioned as well. And, so that's another thing that he gets to do in telling this story. The I thought there's a couple things I'll mention about the story. We don't have to go into detail. We've all read it. But the I like this line in it that he has, I am particular in describing how my uncle walked up the middle of the street with his thumbs in his waistcoat pockets, gentlemen, because, as he often used to say, and with great reason too, there is nothing at all extraordinary in this story, unless you distinctly understood at the beginning that he was not by any means of a marvelous or romantic turn. The fact that he's like, that this detail alone, that he walked in the middle of the street and had his thumbs in his pockets, that detail tells you that this is a common, ordinary experience. And so I'm not exaggerating anything here. This
Couldn't
is true.
possibly be fictional because he walked in the street.
Ordinary details, though, mean that this is a real thing that has happened. Because if it wasn't, it's a fantastic story, does
Yeah.
not have ordinariness in
But
it.
yeah, he's telling the
Yeah.
part though before he passed out, right? It's like all these details just to absolutely corroborate it.
Yes. We also get this now, as he's walking along, we get this kind of tour of Edinburgh. Like this really is like a little tour trip, travel log that we get here for this. A little tour of Edinburgh. It's funny, it's not included in the PDF that I shared of this issue, but in the actual first edition of this, in the back is a very lengthy Walter Scott full volume, 5 volumes advertisement, and it is so detailed. It tells you every single chapter of every single volume about the life of Walter Scott in 5 volumes. And not only does it give you all the listings of every chapter and what happens in every chapter, but then there is criticism, all good criticism from periodicals about all 5 volumes in little paragraphs for like 10 pages.
What a strange
12
advertisement.
pages. And it's like, no one who would read all of this? Like, this volume is really great and it tells the story. Like, it's an absurd way to advertise books. Well, they're just learning how to do this, how to advertise these kinds of things. But what it also says is that they could do whatever they want. Walter Scott is, at the time, 1837, he is still the most popular author in England, in the English speaking world, and everybody wants to read Scott. He's just died, and now they're publishing all these, this is a life of him, and they're still reading all his books. Everyone wants to read Walter Scott. and they just have this 10 pages of praise, 12 pages of praise about each particular volume. It's interesting that it's in the issue that also is the Scottish,
Yeah, and he is
travel.
Scottish. You neglected to mention that he's Scottish, but I mean, he's Sir Walter
He's
Scott
the
for a
Scott,
reason. Yeah,
Walter Scott.
yeah.
All righty. We go to the other thing I want to mention about this story is that he uh what he finds basically is a carriage graveyard. It's a mail coach graveyard. Gleaming well, this is still the Edinburgh
It's a
here.
junkyard.
Yes, the
It's
decaying skeletons of
yeah.
departed mails, meaning mail coaches, and in that lonely place at that time of night, they look chill and dismal. He describes how, decrepit and all, but it's like a carriage graveyard. And part of the whole endeavor of all of the Pickwick Papers, it's a paean to the glory days of coaching, right? Like constantly, all their coach trips, he has something interesting to say about them, something romantic to say about them, how wonderful it is to be traveling at high speeds on these roads, on these coaches. Tony Weller is the great coachman. Um, and this story, getting towards the end here, is a story about the resurrection of the coaching life, right? These rotting derelicts of male coaches get suddenly brought to life in this grand ghost dream that he has.
Now the mail coaches were intercity, right? They were going from one city to another, and you could ride along with the mail
They'd have a route, yeah.
for cheaper because they were going anyway, right? So
Yeah.
as opposed to hiring your own private cab
Oh yeah.
that would take you, another literary connection is Black Beauty had a line of cabs, and so like this is of that era, again, I just read that to my daughter, so it's present in my mind, but that's what I thought of when I thought of the glory days of the cabs.
But from the very beginning, this is, this coaching life is, is constantly romanticized, and it is, they still have coaches in 1837, but far fewer than they had. And very soon, it's all
Trains,
about train travel. It's all
absolutely.
about the trains, and the
That
coaches go
tracks.
away completely. And it's a difference between reading this early Dickens and then you read Paul Dombey and Son, which is all about trains coming in to the city and disrupting life. But this is even pre 1837. I mean, trains are have already begun now, but they haven't quite completely eradicated coaching in England, but they very soon will.
Mhm.
But this novel it's almost, this is a novel, this is a serial, no, it's a serial of nostalgia for the coaching days.
Mm.
And this story itself is about, literally, like, you see the derelicts lying there and they come back to life in a
And
dream.
it wasn't just the coaching days, right? It was the swashbuckling
Yeah.
days. It was when you'd have duels in the street over honor. Like that's the other thing that he's pining for.
And these 18th century stories, and that's what this final illustration, the Fizz illustration for this story, really, plays it up too. Um,
Oh yeah, that giant claymore or whatever was going. I mean, it had
yeah,
to be
he's got
claymore,
this
right?
giant sword here, and just the clothing, the whole 18th century style, and the big blunderbuss here.
Blunderbuss. Yep.
Um,
That's
that
Bazooka Joe on the bottom left there.
Dickens loved 18th century novels, especially the comic novels of Fielding and Smollett. So he loved this adventurous time that people would write about. It's also popular at the time. He has just met William Henry Ainsworth, who is actually one of the most, if not the most popular novels as this is being written. Ainsworth got famous for writing Rookwood, which is partly about Dick Turpin, the famous 18th century, highwayman outlaw.
Mm.
And Dickens has met Ainsworth just this year that he's writing this, and it's Ainsworth that has introduced him to Macrone, who publishes his sketches in the book, and Ainsworth has given Dickens advice, and Dickens will soon outshine Ainsworth, but Ainsworth still continues to be a very popular author at the time. But he's also very well known for 18th century. And this is the fun stuff. But when Dickens does it almost as a parody, that like he's having fun with these kind of 18th century villains who will, abduct the beautiful girl, and this, the Bagman's uncle here will go on and be the hero to save her. Like he's not a hero. Like, and that's the humor of the story as it goes through, and how he's able to like pick up a sword, and never having had a sword in his hand before, he suddenly is a great swordsman.
He just aimed for the target on the guy's vest.
There's also an illustration for this, an early Phys illustration that that is, I don't know where this is. I should, but I don't. I don't know what collection this illustration is in, but this is the illustration. I don't know if this is also at the New York Public Library, but right up the top here, it says Charles Dickens, his mark, with the cross in the middle. And it's what it is he's approved this illustration. And it is virtually identical. I don't think there's nothing different in here at all. He had no comments to make. He's like, Phys, you've caught it. This is the illustration that we need for this story. And then it gets published. Yeah, this whole story it's just, Jack Martin. We find out the uncle's name is Jack Martin halfway through the story. He rescues the woman. He not only kills one of the abductors, she kills the other. She grabs the sword and impales him into the wall, and they're pinned to the wall with each with a sword in them.
Well, and if you're a Sherlockian, the immediate connection you make is to the story of Black Peter, where there's a sailor who is found transfixed by a harpoon, nailed to the wall like one of those toys that you pull the string and they dance, just like in this story, right?
Yes, as they are.
It was Peter Carey himself, Black Peter, I believe, who was murdered in that one.
This is a fun story that really is, I'm so happy he included this in this, because he doesn't have to. He could finish up this whole serial without having to do another tale. Even the ending of this story, this kind of, this funny melodramatic, my dear preserver, exclaimed the young lady, my dear kind brave preserver. Don't, said the uncle. Why? Because your mouth looks so beautiful when you speak that I'm afraid I shall be rude enough to kiss it. I mean, it's fun. Dickens is having fun with these kind of, melodramatic, romantic adventure scenes from the 18th century.
Have you been to Edinburgh? And
no, I haven't.
Okay, because I absolutely plan to follow this exact path if I can. And I want to see how much is still there and remains. I'm not going to bring a huge sword just in case, but I will tuck my thumbs into my waistcoat so people will believe me.
Walk down the street. Yep. All righty. Well, the lady finally, at the end of the story, she says to him, will you never love anyone but me? Never marry anyone beside? And the uncle swears a great oath. And that's one of the funny things about the story is, of course, that's why he never got married in his life, because he swore to this woman in his, this ghostly woman from the past, that he would never do that. He wakes up in the coach and it's all gone. He's now in the derelict, coaching yard, mail coach yard, just like Gabriel Grubb wakes up in the cemetery and there's nothing there to say, that no evidence that the goblins had ever visited him. And that's the end of the story. And then we get a drum roll pun joke at the end. Do you have the ending here? The last few lines?
I do. I didn't recognize the pun
I
joke.
wonder what these you can deliver the line here. I wonder what these ghosts of mail coaches carry in their bags, said the landlord, who had listened to the whole story with profound attention.
Oh, sorry, let me get there. Oh, my uncle.
Very end.
Ah, yes, yes,
I
yes,
wonder what
yes.
these ghost mail coaches carry in their bags. And he responds,
Oh no, the dead letters.
the dead letters.
I
Of
haven't even
course.
gotten there, but I remember it now. The dead letters, of course, said the Bagman.
Oh, wow. To be
Yes.
sure, we joined the land. I never thought of that.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
What do ghost mail coaches carry?
Dead
Dead
letters.
letters. So now some people might not recognize that's actually a term for a kind of letter. And if you all read Bartleby the Scrivener by Melville, you know that he works in the dead letter
Dead letter
office.
department. Yep.
Dead letters were letters that
Could
the
not be
addressee
delivered.
isn't there and it
Mhm.
comes back and there's no way to find them. Those letters are dead and the post office is not legal. They can't open them. They can't
Mhm.
find, they're not allowed to open anything. So they're just dead and they just sit there. And there's a dead letter office that Bartleby in Melville's Tale works at. And ghost mail coaches.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's a modern equivalent too
dead letters.
in email delivery. It becomes a dead letter if it cannot be delivered after a certain number of retries, and so they use the same parlance. But yeah, dead letters.
Dead letters. Well, we've gone well over today. Pickwickians, thank you for joining us for number 17 of Pickwick Monthly. Max, thank you for joining us for this 1 month. This
My
is a great
pleasure.
pleasure. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. A lot
Thank
of
you.
fun.
Thanks everybody for playing along at home.
Coming up next month, Courtney Kralchik will return as co-host for number 18, chapters 50 to 52, when Pickwick visits Winkle Sr., Nathaniel Winkle's father. And we also glimpse more of the tumult from the Eatanswill Blues and Buffs. And Tony Weller treats Reverend Stiggins to a drink. That's all I'll tell you is what he does. So again, let me remind you to subscribe to our channel, to like these videos. You can support the Rosenbach through donation. Your support helps us create more programs like this and also care for our collections. You can also become a member. Membership gives you early access and discounts to programs and courses. You can find out more at our website. I am Edward G. Pettit of the Rosenbach Museum and Library, and I'll see you all next month for number 18 of the Pickwick Papers. Until then, enjoy the moonbeams of summer.
To you and your co-hosts, Ed, you're wonderful.
Thank you, sir. All right,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye. Oh, got to share a picture. Where's my picture? Whoops. Nothing like working,
Hold
operating.
it up. Just hold it up.
That's it. All righty. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the moonbeams of summer. Bye-bye.